Do not attempt to adjust your settings. We have commandeered this channel and are now streaming our pirate broadcast. This is the Pirate Stream. Welcome to the Pirate Stream Dialectical Dissidents, episode 20. Joining me as always is Scott Armstrong, Courtenay Turner. We have a great show planned for you today to go over some of the madness in the world as always. I always, look forward to this with you guys just because, we're always so invested in our work and what we're talking about, and we get to come together and kind of like, distill this a little bit and have our different conversations. So I enjoy this. I'll always look forward to it. So how are you guys today? What's going on?
Good. It's been crazy. I went back to back to Florida. I was speaking at the Reawaken tour 2 Saturdays ago, and then last Saturday I spoke at a Stu Peters event.
Good times.
Yeah. And then I came back in the middle for like a few days to reshoot the, I did that aerial routine. Well, I did too, the Cause Fest. So we filmed it because the live stream footage just didn't really come out. They missed it.
Too bad.
So we came back in the middle of all that and filmed that, and then went back down. So yeah, I'm glad to be back for a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. Quick interval.
Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm good. I went to go hang out with the Unjected crew out in Maui for a couple weeks.
Right.
Like,
That's
that was
right.
awesome.
Very jealous of that.
Back and very refreshed and ready to get back into the information war here.
Yeah. God, I really do miss Hawaii. Every time I thought of you there, I was like, man, I needed to go back to Hawaii.
It was great, man. Like, got to tour the jungles, the beach.
Yeah, Maui is something special.
Did a lot of work too. Got a lot of stuff going.
Right,
We got the new book out, shopunjected.com. We got the new Burn Back Better book out.
Yeah.
Now, so.
As I understand it, a couple of our interviews I mentioned in there, Shelby and I will be doing a follow-up. I think we're scheduled for next week.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah. So we did the focus like on the soil tack and a couple things she was saying. I haven't read it yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Yeah. Check it out because it's a good. It was called Burn Back Better, right?
Yeah, it's called Burn Back Better, Lahaina, A Perfect Storm or Perfect Crime.
Nice.
And it's pretty comprehensive. Like, I had to write a few passages and edit it, and it's like everything from like the build up, what happened on the day of the fire, all the possible like theories and explanations for what caused it, and then kind of the aftermath and the cover up, and just so much, like pretty much all the information we can compile into one text. And yeah, it's really pretty awesome.
Nice.
Lots of citations, lots of photos, lots of exclusive like testimonial from people, like boots on the ground from her friends and stuff there. So
outstanding.
Good stuff.
Congratulations to her. Sure, it's a big moment to have your first book published.
Exactly.
So that's awesome.
And thank you for being a part of it.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Exactly. Well, let's get started with a couple of interesting things I wanted to share. Now, I have obviously my mind's focused on the Israel-Palestine conversation. We're going to go into a couple interesting discussions about artificial intelligence and Ukraine, but I want to start with a couple opening points that I thought were interesting. First, I just wanted to point this out because I thought it was funny. So my birthday is not today. I don't know if you guys know this. Not today. It's April 2nd. It's not secret, but I have my Twitter account as I'm obviously wasn't born in Hill Valley, California, and my birthday is not today, but it's a nod to the Back to the Future. I just think that's funny that they don't know that, and I guess maybe I'm going to get censored because I have my wrong birthday in there.
Today's your Twitter birthday?
My Twitter birthday is today.
What's the significance? What is it?
So November 5th, 1955 is from Back to the Future, and I've always had it in there.
Wait a minute, it's the 5th of November. This is like
remember the 5th of November, right?
Oh, so okay.
All right.
So we're taking down. This is our way of taking down the establishment.
Yeah. Right.
There you go.
I wondered if we should. I almost thought about doing something, in particular. Like it is an interesting historical point to talk about and everything. It's always. I just like the idea of. I mean, that's kind of what we do, right? It's even overlapping with like the very pirate stream concept. There's very similar, kind of broadcasting, just right from the movie, talking about Vendetta, broadcasting your message through. I think that's just, I don't even know if people really grasp like the concept of what the pirate stream, what it is, it's pirate radio. That's what we're doing. And I really think we're doing that, like, especially with the pirate channels too, It's important.
Definitely.
Yeah.
It's so important now with what they're trying to do, centralize everything. Yeah. And I don't want to derail the conversation. I'll just very quickly say that I'm seeing it, especially in the alternative media. Yeah. They talked about, I think in 2020, they've had that whole meeting about how they had to really focus on the alternative media because they were the biggest threats to their agenda. And unfortunately really see it. And there's a lot of people falling for it. And there's a lot of really big kind of outfits that are coming in targeting independent journalists and centralizing it. So
yeah. Well, one note to that, since you brought up the point of the independent media and so on, I've been talking with somebody who I'm very interested in somebody who was talking about possible investment or like capital infusion kind of conversation.
Right.
And, you know, he wants to start a new company, and he was like interested in like picking my brain about it. And it's a great possibility. And I'm still feeling it out to see if, you know, how that would work. But one thing that came up in our conversation, this guy seemed a very genuine person to me, is how interested. His whole point was, I'm going to rebuild. I want to do this in a way that's not like only mainstream, only the right talking points, you know, which I'm like, hell yeah. But what I thought was really fascinating is he brought up this point that apparently this is not a new business and not industry. It's apparently far more prevalent than we realize. And there's these companies that are out there scooping up all, like, remember how we talked about, and everyone used to know about the multi-channel networks? They're still there, but we all have a really bad taste in our mouth about how that went, right? Apparently there's this like surreptitious movement where they're kind of scooping up all these different groups, buying up all this and basically just dumping money into people that we don't know about, right? Which is not new. That's been happening as far back as you want to look, but apparently it's happening rapidly right now, where you're having and I argue people that don't even realize that they are being influenced by something that might try to change their content, or plenty of them that very much do. My point is that we, or you, anybody outside of that, have no idea where this money's coming from. And even more so then, we don't know what that company, who that money, the larger money is coming from. Like there's just so many tentacles trying to control this because they're losing the information war. And I think that's an important point to all this.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to get into the Israel-Palestine conflict, the occupied Palestine genocide to start off today. But I think what's interesting, and one point that I really keep seeing, is how much this alone has changed the conversation in general about a lot of different topics. I think that shows us two things personally. One, that shows, in my opinion, the Zionist influence over so much more than we realize that's now going away because people are beginning to see through the illusion that's been spread around this conversation. But also the fact that it is showing people like the US government, or groups like the US government, or foreign, the European governments are not really who they say they are. I think we know that, right? But they don't really believe in human rights. They don't really believe. And I think it's allowed people, and again, I'm not trying to say like the United Nations or Amnesty International or groups we should trust. We should question everybody all the time. But I've noticed the shift like this. We've seen Amnesty International really take a hard line in regard to what's going on, pointing out that they're killing civilians and indiscriminately bombing in Palestine. There was a recent Amnesty report. But similarly, Amnesty, and this is posted by the Fourth on WikiLeaks, quote, "We call on the UK to refrain from extraditing Julian Assange, for the US to drop the charges, and for Assange to be freed." Now, they've generally taken a stance on this, like most human rights groups have, but I just think it's interesting that it's feeling like they've got momentum, and they're now starting to stand on things that, I don't know, that's hard for the US and the UK to have the leading human rights groups to be like, you're holding somebody you shouldn't be, and calling for his, I don't know. I just on that one point, am I wrong in that? Do you guys see things shifting a little bit because of that larger conversation? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I do have a lot of thoughts on it, actually. I think that the conversations are shifting, but I think it's actually a really dangerous time in the information warfare, because
I agree.
There's this saying like a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. And I feel like that's more true today than ever. And what's happening is I think people are waking up to some truths and to some of the lies that have been espoused for so long, but they don't have a full context.
Right.
It's really hard to catch up very quickly. And we're talking about things that are really heightened emotional, because they've been intentionally designed to be, and to incite passions and to divide and conquer. Of course, that's exactly the point. But because of that, people have all of those preconceived notions and all of their preconceived allegiances. And it's really hard to let go of all of that. And then you're given like one kernel of truth. And let's not forget, how does psychological warfare work? Typically, it is 90% truth, 10% lie. It's that 10%, and obviously that's not a hard number, but, typically that's how it works, is somewhere in that ratio, maybe 80-20, whatever it may be. But that small percentage of lie is really, really dangerous, right? I always use that ice cream cone analogy, and I feel like I'm glad that things are starting to come to the surface, but I think in some ways it's making disinformation even more egregious and more dangerous.
Yeah, that's a great point. But I would say that's kind of just a default of going through this process, because I don't imagine you're arguing that we shouldn't engage in the truth because it would.
Oh, no, not at all.
My point is that we all are on the same page, that the truth is important, but I get the point that I would just add to that is that I think that that's always how this goes. The people that don't want these truths to be revealed are going to do everything they can to, one, downplay them, but also muddy the waters around the next steps.
Yes.
Like, this is what I always point out about the minefield that exists. I made this like about QAnon or all these different points where people started to see these answers, but then they step outside of the normal system and there's a minefield of BS and lies, and they got trapped with QAnon or Russiagate or whatever the next one. And that happens. And so I agree with you. I think that's what I think our job is, to try to show people that they're, it's not just one new, we discovered it, now it's over, right? There's always a huge, endless pit of things we're being lied to about. So, and I'm glad you brought up the hatred, the negativity, because it's a hard, people are allowing their emotions to dictate what's happening around this. And it's causing, there's justified reasons to be angry about what's happening, but the hatred that's applied towards the other side or the individuals that aren't even involved, it's just gross. And it's, go ahead.
Sorry, I absolutely agree. And I would just, encourage people. So when they're starting to navigate this, and maybe they are starting to realize things that they may have not known before, to be very weary and cautious around people who are trying to incite now maybe the reversal. Like now you're switching your hate or blame onto, a different group or maybe the same group. Because I think that is the intention of that disinformation. And really, I sound like a broken record, but I would say, I think if we're going to play the dialectical game, it should be the parasite class versus the people.
Right.
Exactly.
And really to try and get rid of these labels and be pro team humanity.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep, that's it. Yep, 100%.
Yeah, I just think it's super important that, because they'll always try to, even when the truth comes out, they'll then try to use that to pit us against each other. It's all, as much as it kind of feels like a gimmicky hashtag because of where we've become, all lives, Black Lives Matter. I keep saying all civilian lives matter. And I mean it, though. It's not like some kind of, the point is that it doesn't matter the context, the history, the individual person, the baby that was born today does not have any stake in what's going on before, and it's on any side we're talking about. So my point in showing this was just, I think that some of these groups have suddenly started to get a little bit more, whether it's because they see that it's beneficial to them in the moment or they actually care. There's a lot of people are starting to stand up and say things that they wouldn't have otherwise said, I think. And that's a powerful moment.
I don't attribute it necessarily as benevolently, but I do think it.
Regardless of why, the point is that I think people are finding the willing or the ability to say things that they might have not been able to say before because people are just more open to it. And that, I think that's important in any moment. We shouldn't be afraid to say the truth, even though it, because it's being attacked or because it's being labeled. It's like saying the COVID-19 injections were hurting people. In the beginning, that was the most taboo thing in the world, right? And it's like we had to keep saying it, Yep. So and I want to show you some overlaps to the Ukraine war. I think is just funny that then brings us into the main conversation. Yeah. So the New York Post, this was just a tweet. I grabbed it from Truth Social. That's why it's on like an image here. But it's Zelensky invites Trump to Ukraine and says he needs U.S. support for one more year.
That's
so
classic.
He's just reaching out to anybody.
Well, it's like when mommy says no, so you go ask daddy.
Yep.
It's so great.
My grandma always had a magnet on her fridge that said that when mom says no, ask grandma.
Exactly, dude. Oh my God. And they're so. Oh my God, I can't even. That's mind blowing.
It's great. I mean, we were saying briefly before we got started, it's wild. And I do think, I was going to say why people can't see it. I do think people see it. I think that's why it's so embarrassing right now is 30 seconds ago, this was the only thing that mattered. Our world was going to blow up if we didn't do it. And they're just like, oh, wait, now over here.
So now Trump offers mega support for Ukraine. Is he all of a sudden going to be the hero of the left and all of that, right?
Probably. Oh, guarantee not. That their heads would explode.
Yeah, but they'd start calling him a Nazi.
Right.
Yeah, because he's supporting Ukraine.
God, that would be ridiculous.
He should have been
now there's Nazis.
Now he's supporting Nazis. Yeah.
Well, I mean, not because the CIA trained the ass off.
Right.
That's not why.
Because Trump suddenly put his finger into
it.
I was going to say, shouldn't he be the darling of the left because he was behind Operation Warp Speed?
Exactly.
Anyway.
I always say that. I'm like, Trump should go to jail for vaccine genocide.
That's right. Do I need to play the clip I've got right here where every Democrat's like, I'll never take it because Trump bad guy, and then 30 seconds later, it's like, no, it's okay. That's so embarrassing. But it's the same point, isn't it? Yeah. People see that more than ever. You can't keep I made the joke about North Korea when that was the point where it was like that because they really kept saying it then, the biggest threat to our democracy. And then it was like, oh, but look over here. And they just know. And then he would even shoot a missile. And people would barely talk about it. I'm like, this is so embarrassing. But so we're to Ukraine again. We have him reaching out to anybody that'll pay attention because nobody cares right now. And I think what's interesting I just threw this in there. This is around the January 6th part of this. This is kind of disjointed. I threw this in last second, but what the next point was going to go into, where was it? Just about the U.S. government now basically saying, hey, seek peace. Zelensky, shut up. Stop yelling. Go, that because it's not important to them anymore. Ask the Kurds or anybody else the U.S. government uses when they want to, and then just drop them the second it doesn't matter.
Wow.
I think it's embarrassing, right? But so to me, that just shows you the fact that either this was never really important, and it's the new agenda today focus here, or that I think that the Israeli influence over the politicians involved, maybe that's what's changing. I'm not sure. But I also think that the January 6th point I wanted to point out, seeing as how we know that there's influence and overlap to all of this. We know that there was the Azov movement overlap, as there was a member there screaming things in Russian. We know that Israel is one of the chief, through also different mechanisms that Israel has been funding the Azov movement. So it's interesting. But so if you haven't seen it, there's new footage from January 6th that Truth and Media put out, where Ray Epps is whispering to basic Alaska, we're here to storm the Capitol. So it's obvious this guy was downplayed. They're not going after him. And I just want to remind people that it was an obvious, January 6th was an obvious government operation. I just think it's really interesting.
Yeah.
And then
very much so. And those poor prisoners.
Yep.
Oh man.
Yeah, that it kills me. And I talked to Sarah Maccabee, who was at Cause Fest. I talked to her pretty recently, and she's been sending me updates daily, through the trial, and he's still sitting in jail.
God.
I mean, it's just he was an innocent, he was a police officer helping. It's just astounding to me.
Right. And it's just pick and choose, as you got journalists that were there that weren't there on official capacity, but they're because they're the right kind of journalist. They go, oh, but we'll just pretend you were covering it. And then you got people that were actually in official capacity because they wear a red hat. Now you're suddenly a terrorist. It's just, these people are children. I mean, it's embarrassing. And to that exact point, to bring us into the focus for what I'm going to talk about, Liberty Lockdown made a really excellent point, and this shows you how obvious this hypocrisy is. He says, well, now that Russia has won the war, which, by the way, we've always seen that, and they've been lying about it. Now they're kind of tacitly admitting that they'd lost because they're moving on. He says, I assume that they will split the remainder of Ukraine into two separate police states. They should then slowly acquire the remainder of the land over the next 75 years. I've been told repeatedly for a month now that this is an acceptable practice. So if you guys don't catch the point, he's talking about the obvious way that the last 75 years of the occupation of Palestine has gone, and that we can't see that it's hypocrisy, right? Everyone commenting below doesn't even catch what he's saying. But the idea is that Russia, going forward, if they did that, would be literally exactly what we're talking about in reverse in regard to Israel. And I just think it's embarrassing that we can't honestly talk about this. I just think that's an important thing. I was going to stop before we can engage with that, but I know that we have other things to get to. So if you guys mind, I'm just going to jump into some of these points. Let me know.
Go ahead,
okay.
Go ahead.
Now, I wanted to start in general with this. The part that I think is really hard for me on this whole thing is that there's such an obvious one-sided narrative going on. And again, it works both ways. My personal opinion, I see it much more in one direction. Maybe that's because I'm only looking at certain things, but we saw plenty of people in the beginning that were saying that no matter what happened in Israel, that it was justified. And I don't agree with that, right? I don't think anybody should. The civilian is off limits, no matter what part, no matter how long of the history. That's just how we have to be the better, if we want to pretend to be the good guys in government or the US, then they have to act like that. You can't just go, well, they did it, so we're going to do it, which is what always happens. But so as Gareth Ike writes, that I know my stance has upset a few. My language and use of profanities hasn't been great. Many have announced they've unfollowed, which is fine. That doesn't affect me because my ego is beaten out of me years ago. But this is why I won't stop. My heart aches for these people, and I've never felt so helpless. Our collective humanity has been tested this last 3 weeks, and it's failed miserably. Now, the point is that right now, regardless of what happened on October 7th, which we should condemn in regard to the civilian aspect of this has completely avalanched over into one of the most unbelievably obvious genocides I've ever seen in my life. The amount of civilians and people that are being killed right now is overwhelming. And the fact that almost every single group, the United Nations, Oxfam, UNICEF, Amnesty, Human Rights, every single one of them calling for ceasefire, and yet all of these groups are continuing to act like it's continually justified. This is the point that I'm making, and I believe we're on the same page in regard to the fact that civilians matter, no matter what happened before, no matter how this goes forward. And so I want to play you a clip from a woman who is working there, and this is one of these foreign, people that have, like, for instance, the doctors from London and people that have flown in and are helping there. She's worked there for years every time there's been a conflict, and they're asking her about what she sees. Now, if you guys, this is like 2 minutes or 3 minutes, I think. So if you want to pause it, let me know. It's hard to listen to.
Yeah. Tammy, she's a pediatric intensive care and humanitarian doctor with MSF. Tammy, thank you very much for being with us. Can we start with the news that we've had from MSF tonight, that some of your doctors have got through the Rafah crossing today? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I just want to clarify, I'm not speaking on behalf of Doctors Without Borders today. I do work for them, but in this interview, I'm not speaking on their behalf.
Okay.
I can confirm that 22 members of Doctors Without Borders have successfully crossed the Rafah border, but I can't comment further.
Could you tell us, I mean, obviously you work with them and you know them well. Can you tell me what the situation is in Gaza right now for those who stayed behind?
So my relationship with the Gaza Strip over the last 10 years has been as a teacher, not through MSF. I go and I train with a group of physicians and surgeons from Oxford University. I also do work for MSF and I speak on their behalf for the international community on this particular issue. So what I will be referring to in the rest of this interview with you is my relationship with colleagues in Gaza who don't necessarily work for MSF.
Okay.
I have a long-standing relationship with the medical community in the Gaza Strip through my training trips over the last decade.
And are you in contact with them? Are you in regular contact?
I am.
And what are they telling you?
So I just want to say it's a very hard act to follow after listening to Biden's speech because, what I'm about to tell you just seems so such a shock compared to the rest of the narrative that I've been listening to, waiting for my interview. This is an avalanche of human suffering that's 100% man-made. It is the worst humanitarian catastrophe I've experienced in my lifetime and in my growingly long career in humanitarian medicine. And it's burning through the hearts of every single humanitarian that I know. I'm going to paint a picture for you of the degree of suffering that we're seeing. People keep asking me about medical aid and hospitals and the situation of the hospitals. The entire hospital healthcare system collapsed almost a week ago. It was announced on TV for the whole world to see. And in that week, there has been indiscriminate bombardment. And I don't even know if indiscriminate is the right term because it's targeting healthcare facilities, ambulances, churches, mosques, schools, refugee camps, densely populated refugee camps, wiping out entire families in a second, entire multi-generational extended families in a second. There are almost 1,000 families in the Gaza Strip who have had at least 2 members of their family, at least 2 members killed in the last 3 weeks. There are almost 4,000 children who have been killed and identified, excluding almost 1,000 children whose bodies are still trapped under the rubble. Some of them may be alive for a long period before they ultimately die under the rubble. And I'm sorry if there are any young, children watching this. Perhaps this is a good time to ask them to leave the room. But I think it's important that I paint a picture, particularly when I'm following a news narrative that almost dismisses this avalanche of suffering that is unprecedented in modern times. There's an acronym in the Gaza Strip right now. I'm a pediatric intensive care doctor. I see a lot of suffering in my career. There's an acronym that is unique to the Gaza Strip, and it's WCNSF. Wounded child, no surviving family. Children, and it is used not infrequently in the last 3 weeks. It was coined in the last three weeks. One physician told me a few days ago that a little girl came in wounded, and she had a piece of paper in her pocket that she handed to him. He sent me a picture of the piece of paper. It had 27 names on it, and she said, "These are the members of my family that were with me in my home. Please look for them. Please look for them under the rubble. Don't look for this one," and she points to the name of her sister. "I know she's already dead." This is a 10-year-old little girl. Wounded child, no surviving family should not exist as an acronym. And to follow President Biden as he continues to justify and to warmonger, all I can say is this has to stop. It's a collective stain on our humanity. It's a stain on our collective humanity.
Let me ask you, you paint such a vivid and horrific picture. You really do, and I understand that these are your friends who you've worked with and how difficult that must be. You're not alone. I've been hearing today reading testimony today from Philip Lazzarini, who's the Commissioner General of UNRWA. He's been speaking to the UN Security Council. He said this: the sanitary conditions are appalling. People live on very little bread and whatever is left of some water. 70 of their staff members have been killed, and they are looking after 670,000 people in their refugee centres. Is there any sign from what you're hearing of a humanitarian pause or pauses that could be negotiated?
I'm not a politician, but the word pause to me makes no sense. You know, you pause to nourish and hydrate a population before you kill them. It just doesn't make any sense for me. You stop the bombardment. That is what the entire global community should be pushing for and should be insisting on. You know, and I think in leading up to my introduction, I think you interviewed somebody who said something very similar, a Gazan who said something very similar. You know, the priority is not giving us aid. You need to stop the indiscriminate bombardment. So I think, yes, what is needed is a humanitarian truce or a ceasefire, global intervention, things that were voted for by the overwhelming majority of countries on this planet a few days ago in the General Assembly of the United Nations, yet they're not adhered to and are completely disregarded by the powers that be. Two powers, to be specific.
Tanya, I'm going to have to leave there because I am out of time, but I hear you. People will have heard you. It's a very powerful message that you're giving us. And thank you very much for joining.
So it's a pretty vivid picture, right? And I think what she notes there at the end is, in case you didn't miss that, is that they have now, I think it's actually 3 times now, it might only be 2, that the US government and Israel have been the only countries vetoing a ceasefire, where everybody else votes to end what's happening or at least stop the bombing, and they're the only 2. So this is what always kills me about the UN in general, on a side note, is how clearly completely manipulated and co-opted it is by very specific power structures, right? Where every single country in the UN can say, we want one thing, and they can go, we veto. That just seems like it's broken. That's not how that's supposed to work, you know? But so in general, so just I'm not going to pretend like we all have the same opinion on this. I don't know, but I think that what I find the most problematic, especially if we're on the same page that civilian lives matter, no matter where they are, is how we can move from a point where it's always been that civilians have to be protected, especially if you're the good guy, right? And the idea being that collective punishment and these rules of war were created for this exact circumstance, to where you can't just go, oh, well, I'll just bomb everybody because the bad guy's there. That's collective punishment. It's the idea that you need to then either go in on the ground or with something other than indiscriminate bombing. As we know, they just bombed a refugee camp to go after one commander, they said, which killed 400 people. That was on the record. So I just don't get how we can rationally pretend that makes sense. I mean, what are you guys' thoughts on that? Like, I feel like civilians have to matter.
I mean, 100% civilians have to matter, you know, but it's just such a crazy topic, right? Because, you know, initially it all started from, you know, civilians getting killed on the Israeli side, you know what I mean? And so it's like, there's just no, so I'm like, okay, so how do we stop this now at this point? Okay. So what is the solution in this? You know what I mean? Like, okay, so how do we, simple. I know it's not simple. Right. I know it's not simple, but I mean, that's what we need to be focusing on, man, because like, this is like, it's getting to the point where this is going to lead to something much bigger. You can already see it. And you can almost tell like that's what they want.
That's what they
want. There's arguments that could be made that like, who knows if like, Israel false flag themselves to create this whole situation. I've seen compelling arguments for that even still, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but the whole point is that this is leading to a bigger thing. You know, the whole economic system worldwide is collapsing. They need a world war. They need a world war. They like, we were all thinking, oh yeah, Ukraine, this is going to be world war right here. You know what I mean? And now this is happening. Didn't quite work. You know what I mean? Yeah. Probably because a lot of the work that we're all of you are doing, you know what I mean? Yeah. And then here we are at this situation, like, okay, we need to ramp it up a little bit. But it's not working either. But again, you know, as we're seeing, like, they're just going to get more and more desperate. But specifically for the Israel-Palestine conflict, I'm like, what is the solution? What is the solution? Do we just like, okay, ceasefire? I mean, both sides have to be willing to negotiate, like some sort of like, okay, here's your country, here's my country. Let's just live side by side in peace. Is that even possible? I mean, I don't know.
Well, I mean, we can. This is the hard conversation. I mean, the problem with that entire premise is that it's a false premise. right? The idea is that Israel on the open for decades has said that almost every person in power has said they will never allow a two-state solution. Their current administration has said repeatedly ad nauseum, we will never allow them to have their own state. And then Biden stands up and says, we're fighting for a two-state solution. So there's a disconnect there. They're lying to us. So I'm not going to say that every Palestinian wants the same thing, but what I do know is that the only thing we can all seem to agree on, but that this stems from an illegal occupation 75 years ago, or, with even more. And so that means that we stemming from an illegal occupation, that as the UN and any human rights body has always maintained that under the Geneva Conventions, they have the right to armed rebellion. So the only thing that I think we point out is that when that went afoul and they started killing civilians, those people need to be held accountable. But this may be hard for people to wrap their mind around, but that means that the actions by Hamas up until civilians were hurt were legal under international law. And that's not something that's the fact.
That's a good point.
And so I think is when we come back to the solution, it's very hard for the average person who knows the deep parts of this, who maybe is in Palestine, to hear that and go, for F's sake, we've been trying this for 75 years.
How about this? Don't we have the technology to build islands, build land, in the middle of the ocean? Can we just erect a new land
for who?
There? For Israel gonna have that or something.
See, and that's where you get into the problem, right? Because Israel is going to argue that you're then trying to get rid of their Jewish only state, which by the way is racist.
We're gonna build you a nice smart city out in the ocean, man. It's gonna be awesome. I just don't know, man.
I'm just trying to point out that the point is that there are people who truly want to find a solution, and I don't believe the Israeli government is one of them. And I think that's very clear.
Dude,
Israelis, I think, are very active. There's a whole portion of the population that are right now protesting Netanyahu that want a two-state solution. The government, the Zionist government, does not.
How about this? I know Elon is working very hard to terraform Mars. We can just go to Mars, dude. That'd be awesome, dude.
I'm trying to find it. Terraform Mars.
Yes.
I'm trying to find the Albert Pike 3 World Wars.
The
letter
I know what
that
you're talking about.
Mazzini.
Yep.
I posted it, and of course, everywhere I posted it was an eruption of people being like, "You're so gullible! I can't believe you would believe this!" All these words didn't even exist back then. And I will just say, first of all, these people are planners. So regardless of whether, and it's actually not true. A lot of these words, the World Zionist Federation was actually created in the 1800s. So the word Zionism did exist before 1881. But that aside, I think that we need to recognize that these people are planners. And that whether or not Albert Pike actually wrote this letter or not, the first two world wars seem to be laid out to a T. I mean, that seems to be exactly how it played out. And World War III seems to be, at least they're trying to foment it in exactly the way that this letter was written.
And you're implying a Zionist entity is doing that? Is that what you're saying?
Well, their argument was that it's going to be this conflict. They did say Zionist. They say that it's this conflict between Israel and Palestine is really going to be what will foment.
So it was more of a prophecy side of it. Yeah. Exactly. And that's a big point of this. And that's very good.
I will just read, this part if I can see it. Let me see if I can.
Let me read it.
Maybe.
One thing I was going to say real quick is just if you guys want some really in-depth history on Zionism and then the whole situation, how Israel is formed, just Grand Theft World over the last month, they have just been going deep into primary sources, all this stuff. I've learned so much. I had no idea about.
I think they covered the Balfour Declaration.
Oh yeah,
I was recently just going over that too.
So much about that, and then another thing I learned, the transfer agreement, which was a book written by Edwin Black, who did IBM and the Holocaust. Right, he was exiled from his local Jewish community for writing this book because it shows how Hitler was helping. He was Israel, great. Let's just move them all there. It's fantastic. And so,
it's the Zionist side of it, right? This is where Dan Cohen's been talking about this. Oh, go ahead.
That's it. It's just when people feel like one of the arguments that Hitler was involved, instrumental in the formation and relocation of people to Israel is wait a minute, that doesn't fit our narrative and blah blah blah.
I think it's much more complicated.
I know.
Exactly.
But I would say though that it's important to understand that the things you can prove are, for instance, the Lehi party, which comes from the Irgun party. They openly called themselves Zionists at the time, or terrorists at the time, more than once. It's on Wikipedia.
Sure.
Tried to align themselves with Nazi Germany more than once, and then with Stalin as well. The point was they were trying to align themselves with a power structure that would get them what they wanted. And this is where it's very problematic to then stand back. I mean, I could play the clip from Avi Shalom, who who has said, I think it's right here, that he's proven in his own research that Zionists were bombing Jews in Iraq in order to drive them where they wanted them.
Yeah.
This is the history we need to understand about where this comes from. That does not mean I would even go as far as to say every Zionist. I don't think every Zionist who believes it some other part of the country is aware this is what it's from, but I would more so say does not mean every Israeli thinks the same way. That's the important part.
Well, no, definitely not every Israeli. I just think, before we even read this, I think that when I'm talking about like the little bit of information that becomes very dangerous, I think it is an incredibly complex situation.
Oh, it is. Yeah.
They want to play on people's heightened passions because they want to make this into a religious war. Where I think the history becomes really relevant is to understand that there are people who had geopolitical aspirations and they manipulate people's beliefs and worldviews.
Always.
Just
like with Syria or any of these rebel groups, like there's both sides to that. That's a great point. Yeah.
And both sides are being played.
Oh, totally.
And this is where it becomes so incredibly complicated, because I do agree the civilians anywhere should always be protected.
Yeah.
Right. Even if they've got disgusting opinions.
Even if they voted for Hamas. Even if they voted for
I'll just share this. So, of course, I you guys know, and I'm sure a lot of this audience knows that, my family's Jewish, and my mom was talking about how they were going to start putting, essentially making a hate speech to, make anti-Semitic slurs. And I, of course, don't like it. I prefer people didn't say not nice things about anybody, honestly. But of course, I don't like them, making anti-Semitic. But I told her, I said, I don't agree with that. It should not be illegal. You can't, you have to be, if you're going to be for free speech, you have to be for free speech.
Right.
Now, of course, if they're calling for the violence against Jews,
that's a crime.
Yeah, that's a crime. Yeah. Absolutely. And that line should be drawn. And again, that's civilian. But again, to go back to like the both sides being played, and there's like, and we have evidence of this. There's they call it dark liberal money. There's Democratic money that is being pushed to create. It looks exactly like the BLM riots.
It's the DLM. It's DLM.
Liberal
money.
But now it's these pro-Palestinian riots that are cropping up all over the United States, and it looked exactly like BLM. And now we're seeing it, and we have direct evidence that they have been paid. These are paid agitators. So, but it's both sides, right? You see Biden saying how he stands with Israel after he just gave $6 billion to Iran. So obviously they're trying to stoke the tensions because they want to. He
didn't give $6 billion to Iran. He gave back money that the government stole from them a long time ago. But it's still the point.
That's
not
100% true.
It really is, though. It was seized money, but we don't have to get into that. the point is about the. Oh, and I just you make a great point there. Great point there. I just lost it. But anyway, go ahead. What were you going to say? Then I'll riff off.
I was just going to say that. Even if that were true, what about the timing of it? Why now? And then a few days later, politics. We stand with Israel. Like
I don't think. What's interesting though is more so that it's more about political moves. I think the U.S. government and the power structure behind it is aware of the shifting right now, both of U.S. influence and Israel. So I think a lot of them are hedging their bets in different ways. But
I wouldn't say. I think this is also where like the semantics get a little bit like they're important, because I really don't see it as the United States government. I see it much more as like this military apparatus that is working at the behest of, you could call it like the Five Eyes, but really the way I see it is this corporate entity that's the, 3 city states. You have the Vatican, you have the City of London, you have Washington, D.C. And, I don't think that's really something anybody's really going to contest. Like those are city states and there are corporate city states. And I think that that's really they're colluding. And, there's a lot of evidence to indicate that they're at the behest of, whether it be the crown or some sort of consortium above. I call them the parasite class, and that's really what's going on. So it's not even, because I would argue that a lot of the people in both the Israeli and the United States governments are, whether they're being bought off, whether they're just being brainwashed, a lot of them are just pawns. They really don't have any idea, and they're just placating to whatever. And they might think they're doing the right thing. I don't think that they're intentionally trying to, Yeah, I think they're being manipulated.
Yeah,
really.
no, I think that's with every quite frankly, I think we probably all on the same page that I don't even think the governments as we perceive that are what are really calling most of these shots.
No.
And I think, and that's where you get into even just the most basic side of it, the lobbying, or like we talked about in regard to foreign countries, influence of other countries, which is not just Israel, every country's trying to do that.
Absolutely.
And I think that's, and then just, there's much bigger levels to that, but do you want me to read that?
I can read it now. I made it big enough. So should I read the first two or just okay, the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia.
What's the context of this real quick so we understand who's saying it?
So this was a letter that Albert Pike, who wrote the Morals and Dogma, and he was a
super Freemason.
Exactly.
Okay, go ahead.
And he wrote this letter to Mazzini, and it was seen as like a prophecy. Now there's questions, just for everybody to know, there are questions of whether this was actually written or not. I've heard that it is actually in the Morals and Dogma book, but it's an 800-page book. I have not finished the book. I have not found it, so I can't confirm nor deny. But I will say it looks like whether or not this is really a letter that was corresponded, it definitely seems to be playing out. So I think it's worth paying attention to. Mm-hmm. And there are people who even, like another example we could just take is that, like the Bible, whether you believe in it or not, there are people who use revelations, people on the other side, the anti-humanity who use that to, make the plan carry out. So I think people on all sides should really just look at it and pay attention, whether you think it was a legitimate letter. We must be brought about in order to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia, of making that country a fortress of aesthetic communism. The divergence caused by the agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. At the end of the war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other government, in order to weaken the religions. That's World War I. The Second World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between fascist and political Zionists. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed and that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, the international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time we see when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. The Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur of the Illuminati between political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. The war must be conducted in such a way that Islam, the Muslim Arabic world, and political Zionism, the state of Israel, mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on the issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. We shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere, the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization and the multitude disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, brought finally out in the public view. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time.
Damn.
So it's like a Luciferian thing.
Yeah, I mean that's
so where it's
the light bringer. They're all about that,
right? So ultimately, they're suggesting, whoever's writing that both Zionism, Christianity, which Zionism is not even really a religion, are being used. Exactly. Right. And so the people, it's interesting.
It is really interesting because there's like that letter, there's like, the protocols of the elders of Zion. And then there's the silent weapon for quiet wars that like paints a picture of like what is actually happening, even though they say, oh, it's debunked. It's not, it doesn't exist. But it's like, yeah, but there's so much in there. That's
There's so much in there.
With reality, you know?
And I have a theory that I just came up with 2 nights ago, and I'm like trying to find the information to corroborate it. I'll share it here. It's just a theory. I will just preface by saying it is a theory, but I've already found some evidence to substantiate it. I think Hegel was a member of the Illuminati.
Probably. Of course.
It turns out that he was a huge fan of Fichte. Fichte was the one who showed him how, because the dialectic really starts with Plato and Kant, and it was Fichte who showed Hegel that he could, take it into this, like, make it a quote unquote science, so that they could use it to progress the dialectic towards an omega point, essentially the historicity of man. Really, the Cliff Notes is towards the omega point, which we could call the New World Order. They called it the New Underground World Order at the time. But Fichte was like a very high level Freemason, also probably an Illuminati member. Goethe was an Illuminati member. We have definite
How do you even go about verifying any of that stuff? Because it's such a long time ago.
Well, it was a long time ago, but it was definitely not like prior to documentation.
Right.
So there's some really good books from insider whistleblowers. And, the way I've been trying to read through it is you read all of these different people and see what matches up. Because if they're all saying things, even from opposite sides, that still point in the same direction, you have a lot of potential.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, we should definitely talk about it when you get done.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I was going to make a point that you referenced that I thought was important, just since we discussed the idea right in the beginning of the illegalizing, anti-Semitism, which is such a dangerous trap. First of all, free speech, which, even the terrible things should be protected under free speech, but that they're labeling things that are, the Zionist government killed people. Well, that's anti-Semitism. Well, it's not, and that's happening. And so that's what we're seeing today. Shout out to Arnaud Bertrand, who pointed this out. There's a new bill in France that literally, one of the lines, this is right in the beginning, insult committed against the state of Israel by one of the means set out in the article, which is as simple as saying something that they deem anti-Semitic, is punishable by 2 years imprisonment, 75,000 euros for insulting Israel as a French citizen. Like this is what and I made the point about this in the last show about the Hurricane Harvey, where people had to sign a document that said that they wouldn't protest against Israel, which, I should have scrapped, which you remember that? That's real. It's right here. Actually, I've got the,
well, and the other side is happening at the same time, right? Didn't Kamala Harris come out and make this whole thing that they're doing a big movement against Islamophobia?
Yeah, I heard that. I heard that on No
So
Agenda.
I just really encourage people to understand that they are really trying to provoke on both sides.
Yep.
And this is about stoking tensions.
But there's a whole different thing. I don't disagree that that's happening, but coming out and saying that hate is bad is very different than coming out and saying we will penalize you for saying a certain thing.
But that was the direction they were moving in.
Well, but as it
they have to start by setting the stage.
Yeah, well, so they're setting the stage right now, and the ultimate solution is AI governance.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's really what it's all about. While they're busy with all of this.
But what I'm saying, though, is we have to make sure the distinction is they came out and said this is bad. And I assume there will be action, but that hasn't happened. On one side, though, in every country, we're having literal legal action taken against people for taking a stance. Oh, I did want to point out the Palestine. That was what I wanted to comment on. It's interesting to me, really interesting about the funding of protests, because I think here's what's interesting is there's a lot of very organic protests, as there always are in any movement, that are going out and simply going, I want free Palestine, that are then being framed as Nazis by lunatic manipulators, in my opinion. But I guarantee you that there are people that are being used in that way. Now, do you think that in the way of funding protests that are organic? Now, do you guys believe or think that the funding of these protests are in just to get people to protest Palestine, or is it to get people to go out and take the stance that can be used in a way that makes them look like we hate Jews and blah, blah, blah? Like, how do you see that being played?
Oh, I think it's to try and increase anti-Semitism.
Right. Okay.
Yeah,
I think
that's exactly what that's all about. And so again, it's just to stoke this tension, and this is really very similar playbook of World War II, because a lot of what they did, and I do not agree with this, is that they tried to attach Jewish identity to the Holocaust.
Right.
Most of my family wasn't even in the Holocaust. They came here before that. Now, my great grandmother watched her mother be sliced in half by the pogroms. There's been persecution and there has been genocide of most different, nations, races, ethnicities. Right. I don't condone any of that. I do think the Jews have incurred quite a bit of it. And of course, I don't, I don't support that. No. But to attach our identity to the Holocaust is the purpose of that is to victimize us. And if we're here, we're survivors. We're not victims. Mm-hmm. And I think to keep rehashing that is not empowering at all. Totally. And to align your whole entire identity and a whole people's identity to that instance is not in any way empowering. And it's done to create this division. Yeah. So mm-hmm. And justification for a lot of this stuff. It's like, well, if we don't go and slaughter all these civilians, then what the next step is, another Holocaust, right? Am I right about that? And I'm hearing that rhetoric. And I honestly,
as they commit a Holocaust to present what they claim will be, it's the same. It's that's civilians.
That's like Greenblatt, like that guy, like that's his go-to. It's like every time someone sneezes the wrong direction, the next step is a Holocaust, right? You know what I mean?
Right, right. Which is not necessarily false. People do. There are wild, and I think including people saying these statements that would carry out that thing, but he's not wrong. No. These things can lead with left untouched. But this is the point about, in my opinion, about both sides of this, right? Nobody can condone the active attack on civilians in Israel, but no one can also condone the attack and open continual attack on civilians in Gaza, right? It has to be this, it has to be both. And that's the problem, is that people like the Ben Shapiros of the world will get mad about you saying that I care about both peoples and then redirect it to one side. And yes, that is, but I would argue in a much lesser degree, happening in both ways. That's
it's happening on both sides.
Right.
It's happening on both sides. And I agree. The civilians should not be, they should not be fair game at all. Right. Like that should be
on your episode. We were talking about this before, but your episode you did on Friday talking about the 62% of the 9,000.
Yeah, man, that's from you, and I have that in here.
But there's a clip that you showed featuring Dershowitz. Dershowitz. Did you see this at all?
He's a creep.
So he was on there talking about how, justifying the murder of the civilians because they voted for Hamas, so therefore they're just as culpable,
innocent
just
civilian
as
thing as they're doing.
And so for me, I was like that.
Most of them didn't vote for Hamas.
Well, exactly.
Most of them are children.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, that was when that happened.
That was Ryan's point. He was like, well, what about the brand newborn baby that did they vote for Hamas? But the fact that in his mind it's justifiable to kill civilians because they voted by and large.
I don't even think he believes that.
It's so crazy. It's so crazy. But my takeaway was like, well, that, ladies and gentlemen, is a great reason not to vote right there. So you don't get lumped into.
I'll support that.
Yeah. You don't get. I'm not. It wasn't me. I didn't vote for it.
Yeah, but it's just.
If now all of a sudden they're trying to create a narrative with you voting for a certain thing is now justification for you to be murdered.
Well, that's the point I made on the show. Is it so? There by default, what he's doing is saying everybody's accountable, even though not everybody voted, even if they were alive when it happened. The point is, there's different arguments. People voted for Fatah. That was part of it. So the argument today is that everybody then under Trump's administration was accountable, which is that they would lose their minds if you made that point. I'd not support Trump. It is about, that's why I don't think he believes it. It is a obviously non-objective stance that whitewashes an entire group of people, which we've always argued was ignorance. And they're just doing it to act like this is acceptable. And that's the problem with this, is that there are innocent people, as we keep pointing out.
Yeah.
Now, go ahead.
I'm just going to make this statement just because I think it is really important. You brought up like the elders, the protocols of Zion. Yeah. I brought up this, Albert Pike letter that brings the Luciferian end goal. And I just want to say that people, like, a lot of times they'll use things like the Rothschilds as a justification. The Rothschilds are not Jewish. Yeah. They're Satanists.
They're Satanists. Yes, they're all Satanists.
I'm just going to come
out and say it. But you can find the connections to the Jewish community just like you could find in the Christian community and everybody else.
Mafia, most mainline historians do not disagree that was a real thing that existed. Right. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of evidence, around all the details. This was 7th century to 13th century, or 700s to 1300s. It's kind of a long time ago. But what we do know is they were given a choice of one of the Abrahamic faiths, and they chose Judaism because they were bankers, so they wanted to be able to lend money, and the Muslims and the Christians could not because it went against the usury. Exactly. So. But this does not make Jews the root of all evil. It does not make Jews the problem.
No, I'll follow up on that because there's such an important point to make, is that that's what's happening right now, is they're trying to portray Jews as in general. But you're so right. They're not even Jewish. They hide behind the liability shield of being Jewish. Exactly. But they are satanic, Luciferian, evil people. And the same thing happened historically too. It's like they say no Rothschild ever died in a concentration camp, right? It's the same technique. They're just gonna run amok at the top and then blame everything on the folks at the bottom, you know what I mean? So it's very important to realize that these are not our friends, not the people that we know that are Jewish or identify as Jewish or whatever. That's not what this is about at all.
Exactly.
And we cannot lose sight of that no matter what.
I don't blame the Catholics for all the wrongdoings of the Jesuits,
right. Yeah. Or even for what their Catholic Church hierarchy did.
Oh yeah.
It's like, it's always stupid to whitewash and broad brush anybody. We always used to make that clear, but now today everyone's doing it like it's some kind of badge of honor. It kills me. But since you bring it up, I just thought it was interesting. Here is the Balfour Declaration. Let's not forget, it's literally "Dear Lord Rothschild," right? I mean, that's where it comes from. And I mean, also, since we bring it up, let's not forget that in this document, which used to be denied, right, which is very real.
It's very real.
Yeah, it's provable. But it's basically the point they make. Two things is one was Jewish Zionist aspirations. We need to understand that. And then the other part was that it was to be established in Palestine. So clearly it was real, and we all know that today. But the one thing I thought people don't mention that it says a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of the existing non-Jewish community in Palestine, which didn't happen. But I don't even think the British government cared about that either. I think they were being bombed by the Zionist terrorists at that point in time, which is what was happening. But I just think it's interesting. Now, good.
Sorry, I was just saying that this is why it is so complicated, though, because now you have people who are there. And it's not the fault of the people who are there.
Exactly.
To have
or
them
the Jewish baby or Israeli baby that was born today. Exactly.
They're not aware of, like, most people don't even know about the Balfour Declaration, right. So to then blame them. I mean, it's kind of like, saying that we should be giving reparations or that we should suddenly give back all the land to the Native Americans, right? I don't think what happened to them was necessarily right either.
Right. But here, that's a really interesting point. See, this is such a big conversation that we're talking 5 hours. No, but that's such a great point, because here, let's take a really hard stance on this, because my point the whole time has been, that's one of the first things I said was it's not fair, as much as it's a difficult conversation, for the average Jewish or Israeli family, because both exist in Israel. That's one point I always think is gross, is that people like Ben and the rest of them, or even the Israeli government, are only about the Jews in Israel. There's a lot of people other than Jews that live in Israel, and they just don't care about them.
Israel. They're Christian. They're atheists.
Right. Yeah. But again, the point about the actual beginning of it, if we especially since there's not, it seems in many cases on both sides, not honest engagement with this, and I would say from like the PA, Palestinian Authority, or Hamas, that they don't really want, it's all this argument about two-state solution, and it never gets reached for whatever the reason. The only way that seems to actually solve this is to go back to the origin, and that would be the illegal occupation, which means that Israel is not allowed to be in Palestinian territory. But your point, it's not fair to the families that didn't choose to be part of this, that grew up in this lifestyle, and in many cases are right now fighting for a lot of the Palestinians, right? Yeah. Same point, though, is with if we're really going to take a hard stance, the argument would be that the land is the Native Americans, right? But think about the overlap for the American that might not understand that, is that would mean that you as an American have to leave. Yeah, you have to leave your home and move yourself somewhere else, which is not really fair to the average person today, as much as it still would be just to give it back to the people that originally had it. That's why this is so impossible. But
this is why it's so complicated.
It is. But see, this is why it comes to what Scott was bringing up last time, which is that, okay, so what's the solution? And until we have an actual, like, this is what I loved about, I just had his name up here, Hussam Zamlat, who said, who is a representative of the Palestinian Authority, which I don't believe is honest in all this. I think they're working for Israel for the most part, but I find his statements to be genuine. His point was, look, the only thing Palestine wants is the equal application of international law. Like, that's where they're at this point. Like, we're not even talking about two states. We know that's not happening. We just want there to be equal application of international law. That's not happening. And I think that's what's so interesting, is we need to come to a place where there's an even playing field to even then start the conversation about how we negotiate, because all that happens, like we saw with Yemen and anywhere else, the moment that starts, whoever it may be, the party that doesn't want it to happen will fire a rocket. Or something will happen. And they all go, oh, it's their fault. They did this, and we're going to pause everything. And it goes forward. And this has been happening for 75 years.
Well, I think we also have to acknowledge that there are these parties, right? I mean, we brought up Hamas. Hamas is not Palestine.
Exactly.
And Hamas was we have lots of evidence that Hamas was created concomitantly with the Mossad and CIA. Right. And it was part of this.
They've admitted that.
Intelligence.
Avi Cohen, I think, to the Wall Street Journal, said on the record that was our creation. Right?
Exactly. So now you can't now conflate. We've got the people of Palestine and the people of Israel, and then we have these parties, right? So we have very similar things going on here. I mean, I may not like what the Democrat Party is doing, or what the Biden regime is doing currently, but Yeah, so we have but that's not necessarily the American people, nor is it reflected.
Right.
Yeah.
So I heard there's lots of land over the ice wall. Maybe there's something over there we can go find. Like, let's lead an expedition.
With the wildlings?
Antarctica, anyone?
Oh, yes. Let's go over the ice wall, right? And find this new land. Everybody can live happily ever after.
I immediately go to Game of Thrones when you say that. I'm sorry, I'm a nerd, but no, I think what the analogy is important, that it is the average people, and that's the way we have to look at it. Like that's the point they make about Lindsey Graham and his lunacy, where he comes out and says something. That doesn't mean that everyone in the U.S. government thinks that, or that every American thinks that. But we tend to do that as in the United States. That somebody in Iran says, oh, Iran thinks this. That's happening a lot right now about a Hamas leader. If that's in many cases, by the way, I've shown that they aren't even actually part of Hamas, but it's somebody just wearing a brown person says something. The Hamas leader said this. And the point is that even if it was a Hamas leader, does not mean that everybody in Hamas or everybody in Palestine thinks that. It's just this willful disregard for the nuance. And this always happens in this kind of conversation. And I do want to reiterate about the protest part of it, though. I think that's really important, that we can prove that there are entities funding protests that I think we agree that it's about turning it into the extreme side of it. There are an endless amount of people out there protesting for Israel, protesting for Palestine, that just want this to end. There are people that are trying to stoke the division by seeding the narratives in there to make us attack each other. I think that's important.
An example is, like, I think some of these, that we have some evidence to indicate that some of this, left-wing money is being funneled into pro-Palestinian protests. And I do think they're agitators in order to incite further anti-Semitic rhetoric and sentiment. And I think that is intended to stoke a reaction. So I would encourage people, and this is just, I really try to encourage this. It's really difficult, but education goes a lot further. Plant seeds, trying not to play the reactionary, even if you yourself are not violent, but not to call for the violence of anybody who might have the power to do so.
I don't know why anybody anywhere thinks that calling for violence against another person is somehow a solution. It's ridiculous to me. Like, I'm not even talking about the idea of going after, the right to defend yourself, which is not even what's happening anymore, or the idea that going after the person that attacked you. It's completely morphed into something else. And anybody out there acting like, because that's what's happened now. We've got the Israeli leadership openly saying now, and that's what UN is pointing out, Amnesty International, they're calling for genocide. They're saying get rid of all of them. They're not hiding that anymore. So that anybody doing that is on the wrong side of history. There are innocent people here. And this is why this is important to me. And this is what we need. This is what I think it boils down to. Whatever side you think you're on, what the United Nations, Geneva, is pointing out, that over 9,000 Palestinians have been killed. 62% of these people, according to the United Nations, are women and children. I just, that is unbelievable to me.
So not that that's not terrible. Obviously we can, as humans, have compassion for that. But I will say, I think the UN has a very different agenda, which is why I brought up, my topic we'll get to. But I think that they do want to, whether or not Pike wrote this or not. I think the UN and their acolytes, the World Economic Forum, the Parasite Class people, have a very vested interest in fomenting a World War III. And this is the great way to do it. I do think the Ukraine war was kind of ignored. It did not incite the same type of reaction that they would have liked.
Far less children were killed. That's probably why.
That's true. And of course, children are, there's many facets to that, right? There's, if you do take the Luciferian, view, then there's a sacrifice there. And there are people who believe that. So there's that. And then of course you're now, heightening the emotions of people who are watching that, who, want to defend the children. Of course, I advocate defending the children.
Sure.
But I just think we need to see how much we're being manipulated. And I think all of this is really, while behind the scenes, they have their agenda, which is, that we'll get to, but it's to bring about the AI world society. And I think that's really, they need a war for us to be distracted, for us to fight each other, and for us to be desperate. Like morally, emotionally, financially, just to really strip us of whatever resources they can to push us to say, yes, whatever you can do to save us.
Yeah. And strip us of our compassion too, right?
Of course, desensitize us.
And this is one of the things that I think is important in all this, is that never let a good crisis go to waste does not typically mean that the crisis is fake. It can. But in this case, my point is the United Nations stating a fact, which we can prove is happening, is used, but doesn't mean we should, we should be saying this is a problem that needs to be acknowledged. And then, yes, it's also being used against us. 62% of the children of the people being killed, women and children, are coming from multiple sources now being backed up by corporate media, by UN, by Amnesty. Now, none of these people do I trust at face value. Right. But my point is that this is something that is so impossible to ignore, that's being displayed on everything we can see, that not even Israel's denying anymore. As we just showed you, now they're claiming the bombing of 400 civilians to kill one person. There's never been a time in history that was what we claimed was the good thing. That's what terrorists do, right? And I think that's what we need to realize, is that even if these are being used to drive us into this, we can't lose our compassion. We have to realize that whether it's the UN pushing this or a government causing it, we need to step up in the midst of this and make sure we can do something to help those people. I think we're all in that stance, right? And so that's where I'm coming from. And I don't, but you're right. Nobody should miss that this is being used and marshaled into something much larger, and that's terrifying. But I'm just,
and I was also just going to say that I'm not sure that there's an easy solution either. I don't disagree that we should absolutely have compassion and pay attention to what's going on and try and figure out how to protect these people. But
stop bombing
this
them.
Is not an easy.
I stop bombing them. That's the easiest way to.
Easy.
Well, but I think this is the thing about it, is it is easy. It's very simple. Stop bombing where the civilians are, right? There's the what you do to solve what problem you feel is happening, going after Hamas, is very different than acting like, what do we do to stop this?
But this is stop bombing who? And then do you think that it's really going to just quiet down?
Well, first of all, there's been rockets flying from Palestine for 75 years. It hasn't been this hasn't, and most of these are causing very minimal damage. The point is that it's an occupied territory that has a legal right to do that, not civilian areas, but to fight back. So the problem then becomes the indiscriminate, non-stop bombing, which is why every human rights group in the world is going, just stop bombing them, which is very simple. I'm not saying that ends the problem, but I'm saying if the problem we're trying to fix is what we're staring at, there's a simple solution to it, right? I think that's my opinion, but I think that's very clear, because that stops the people being killed. And I think we need to understand that the reason that the ongoing bombing and the rockets that predominantly don't cause that much damage are happening is because of this, and because of the ongoing illegal occupation, which is just stating a fact. But I don't know. I think that stopping children from being killed, which is the only thing I'm really focusing on the moment, is stop bombing. I think that's very clear. And that's backed by most of the people in the international community, but I don't know. That's my opinion.
I just don't know that if they were to stop bombing, that then Hamas is really going to step back and not.
But they haven't for 75 years. So what I'm saying is, if the static reality has been that they've been firing rockets every now and again, and the Iron Dome stops them or doesn't, and there's a little bit of damage here, people run to their shelters. And I'm not saying that's okay. It's sad. It's horrifying. But that's been this reality. And now this is going on. So the only different part of this is the using, and let's not forget, they've got minimal effort. They've got very minimal effort. They don't have an Air Force. They don't have a Navy. They don't have any, they've got what we colloquially bottle rockets, right? And they've gotten better over the years. You can see that they've gotten stronger, but to use the kind of munitions that the U.S. government is sending, the kind of stuff that's borderline. I mean, anyway, the point is, this is such.
We don't know that they don't have more powerful. I mean, that's
they have more powerful today, but they haven't used what Roberts talked about, the possibility.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's.
But you'd argue they probably would have if the argument being that they would, if they stopped, that they would then use the more powerful thing, just doesn't really make sense. And it's possible. But
well, it depends on who's driving it, right? Then you could think about if there's a situation where the powers that be are the ones who are really driving this, and they're hell bent on creating a world war, then they're going to pivot to whatever the next. I'm not saying that. I obviously care about the children.
Oh,
I'm
definitely.
Just saying I don't think, although that may seem like a simple solution, I don't know if it really is. I mean, if it were, and I had a crystal ball and I could say that would actually stop it, then great. But I don't know.
No, that's fair. Look, that's an impossible situation. No one's going to solve it sitting here. But what I'm simply saying is that if the argument is we don't know if that will stop it, why don't we try it out?
Right.
Why don't we just stop bombing for it?
Trust. I mean, we looked at who is in favor of this. It is most of the UN, and I don't necessarily trust them either. So.
Yeah, but what I mean is that the UN information is all being relayed. Like this is coming from the United Nations on the Palestinian Refugee Agency, the Health Ministry, but it's also been reported, and we can also watch it happening. Like that's what I mean is when we get to the point. And let me just rattle through some of these. We get to the point where Wolf Blitzer is talking to them about this, and he can't even digest the idea. Like, so you're telling me you knew they were there? Like it's just amazing. I'll play that in a second. Okay. Well, so the point is, so not only are we seeing the fact that it's 62% children and women, which is not hard to understand if 50% people in this location are under the age of, I think, 15.
18,
they keep saying, well, they keep saying 18, but I think directly from the people on the ground, it was 14 or 15. But let's just say under the age of 18 to be accurate. Total of 48 UN buildings have been bombed. So this is what I have a hard time. There's no way Israel knew where they were. They have the coordinates. They've been confirmed before this. This is a back and forth thing. We're here. We're UN. Not even Israel is claiming that Hamas is there. Right. Nobody, only people online are like, well, Hamas was probably there, or Hamas was doing there, or they're controlled by Hamas. Not even Israel's making the argument. No one the only time I even saw corporate media talk about this is when Wolf Blitzer was forced to, because one of his interviewees was like, oh, I don't know anything about the refugee camp, but let me tell you about and then went right into it. And that's 70 people they've killed that work for them, 48 buildings. I just don't see how, that's this right here. They've got 70 colleagues have been killed. How we don't realize that means at the very least that they're targeting protected areas that hold civilians.
Well, if any other country would have done that, would there be like large international outcry, like
that's what
declarations of war?
I'm not trying to stand with the UN. I'm just simply saying it's that's wild to me that you can have 50 United Nations buildings bombed full of food and supplies and then have 70 of their colleagues killed and no one's talking about it.
It's like a little USS Liberty type situation.
Yeah, you know what I mean? Yeah, totally. Yeah. I don't know. I just think that's, feel free to comment if you want. I think that's interesting. And it kind of highlights a very, we know that this is after we have the Jabalia camp bombed twice. And then we have a school that was bombed where white phosphorus was used, which even Human Rights Watch has did in their own investigation and proved they've done in 2009, but they also did it since October 12th. White phosphorus used in Gaza and Lebanon. There's a lot of this stuff. So I might skip some of these. I just want to play, I just think it's important that we recognize that it's not deniable that they're bombing locations they know are full of civilians, and they're not even claiming that they're any justifiable reason other than things like this. And here's Wolf Blitzer trying to make sense of this.
Yes, I can. We were focused again on our target, a senior commander, Wolf, and we'll be updating you with more data as the hour moves ahead.
But even if that Hamas commander was there amidst all those Palestinian refugees who are in that Jabalia refugee camp, Israel still went ahead and dropped a bomb there, attempting to kill this Hamas commander, knowing that a lot of innocent civilians, men, women, and children, presumably would be killed. Is that what I'm hearing?
That's not what you're hearing, Wolf.
That's exactly what he just said. And he goes on to say the same thing, but weirdly enough goes, no, that's not what you're hearing. And then let me say the same thing.
Again, we're focused on this commander, again, who you'll get more data who this man was. Killed many, many Israelis. We're doing everything we can. It's a very complicated battle space. There could be infrastructure there. There could be tunnels there.
Could be.
We're still looking into it, and we'll give you more data as the hour moves ahead.
But you know that there are a lot of refugees, a lot of innocent civilians, men, women, and children in that refugee camp as well, right?
This is the tragedy of war, Wolf.
It goes on, repeats it again another time. And Wolf is just like, but you knew they were there. Like, he just can't seem, because that's crazy. Mm-hmm. That's never been what we pretend is justified, right? That's just never been the reality of the situation. Now, I've got a few more things, but in interest of time, since we don't only talk about this, I just want to rattle off some points here. For instance,
I'll just add really quickly. Mm-hmm. So you were talking about like the different weapons. There is some evidence to indicate that they do have weapons, that are like nuclear power weapons.
I disagree with that. Strongly,
maybe, but we don't know. We really don't know.
Yeah.
And, this is just to play the counter argument, because the argument that's being made is, well, then they're going to just wipe Israel off the face of the map. Yeah, and that is really that, but that is what people are concerned with, and we don't know.
The argument then by default would be we continue indiscriminately bombing where 2.5 million civilians live, because if we don't, they might attack us. That's a hard thing for me to swallow. You know what I mean?
I get it, but I'm just saying we really don't know. It's just not that simple. Mm-hmm. It really isn't.
Yeah, but see, I have a hard time with that, because it is, if we're talking about saving people, right? And the idea being that to not know is not a justifiable reason to continue murdering civilians. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's like, we know that's part of it, as we just heard him admit. Well, that's war, right? Mm-hmm. So the idea being, if they wanted to go after Hamas, which is what they claim, that's their only objective, they could go on a ground assault and do it. and they're going to take losses. Sure, but that's the point.
How do we bring both sides of the table to talk? Can we just bring both sides?
They've tried
to talk? Can we just
many times. Here, let me play something for you that will make this very clear. This is not super new.
I mean, I know, but it's both sides just need to.
Yeah, but this is why. This is why that will never succeed.
I feel like it's not on both sides. I feel like the same people are doing it and playing both.
Right. Exactly. Okay, but see, this is the problem, though, is that they have the Palestinian Authority, which is completely overtaken by even the West Bank and Gaza will tell you by Israel, but they point at them as even who will take power should all of this get destroyed. So right now, and then you've got the Israel side who says this.
This is the defense minister, Moshe Yaalon, talking just a couple of weeks ago. Israel is going to hurt Lebanese civilians, to include kids of the family. We went through a very long discussion. We did it then. We did it in the Gaza Strip. We are going to do it in any round of hostilities in the future. That's the defense minister. This is the military chief of staff, Benny Gantz. The next round of violence will be worse and see this suffering increase. He headed up the military assaults on Gaza, the last two. This is the Minister for Education in the Netanyahu government. There will never be a peace plan with the Palestinians. I will do everything in my power to make sure they never get a state. He also said, if you catch terrorists, you simply have to kill them. I've killed a lot of Arabs in my life, and there's no problem with that. This is the Minister for Justice. Palestinians are all enemy combatants. This also includes the mothers of the martyrs. They should follow their sons. Nothing would be more just. They should go, as should the physical homes in which they raised the snakes. Otherwise, more little snakes will be raised there. That's the Israeli Minister for Justice in the last few months. The Israeli Deputy Minister for Defense. Palestinians are beasts. They are not human. The Minister for Foreign Affairs, CP Hotley, this is the last one. My position is that between the sea and the Jordan River, there needs to be one state only, the State of Israel. There is no place for any agreement of any kind that discusses the concession of Israeli sovereignty over lands conquered in 1967. Now, these are the official statements of several ministers of the current government of Israel. In one case, actually advocating genocide of all Palestinians, including children, and calling them snakes. Now, can I ask you, Taoiseach, do you not think that if we're defining terrorism, that is the language and thinking of terrorists? That it is absolutely...
So I will just, I agree that that's horrible. I'm not advocating for the genocide of anybody. But if you look at, conversely, there is a lot of that argument on the other side too. This is why I say it really isn't simple. When you look at, like what the fundamentalists or, the extreme Muslims believe, they believe that everybody who does not follow there should be eradicated. So I don't advocate that either, So I'm just trying to show that there really is both sides are. That's why it's not.
Yeah, but see, this is the problem, though, is it all roots back to an illegal occupation. That's where this all begins. The stealing of land and then the going forward. So what my point is, there's plenty of people that are going to feel but I would also point out that what we can see is you have a government supported by nuclear powers in the world who is openly from positions of power advocating the murder of an entire people. Then you've got Palestinians who with scattered factions and different groups that we can prove are created by Israel to manipulate them. And these people are going, kill all the Jews. Most of these Palestinians, when given the chance to speak, are not saying that. And we can prove that, but there's plenty of them that I've also shown that have those opinions. But my point is, it stems from a location where they've, over the last 75 years, watched their families get killed in front of them, watched themselves get starved to death. They have 97% undrinkable water. All these things matter in this conversation, right? So we're at a point where we have that leading the conversation when you have minimal rocketry and things firing out, where people that are saying the things we just heard are literally talking about ethnic cleansing and bombing. So it has to be seen in that's why I think even the UN came out and said, look, this didn't happen in a vacuum. We have to understand where all this comes from today, and then I always maintain the legal standing of the UN, the Geneva Conventions, means that they can literally, well, and here's the other part of it. I was going to say fight legally and resist with arms. that we are watching an occupation, which then argues that the Israeli government, the Zionist government, decided to bring civilians into an ongoing military situation. Like, so at the same point, they have a legal right to take responsibility for the people that they brought and put right up against an occupied wall. You know what I mean? That's crazy to me. And then you have settlers who are armed, who even the UN is now pointing out are roving around and shooting people in the street. This has been reported by pretty much everybody now, you know, and these are occupation forces. So it's just such a complicated situation, you know, but I think that it's obvious to see from a governmental standpoint who's in the wrong. People's actions,
well, I guess I just don't see it as like one government versus the other, because I see it as
there's only one government.
Yes,
that's the point.
I see it a higher apparatus.
That's chop the Hydra, chop off the Hydra or something.
And if you read the book, the Milner-Fabian Conspiracy, it talks a lot about this, that this was the plan, you know, the Muslimification of Europe, and it was designed to do this. And a lot of the, you know, some of the Fabians split between the being Zionist or pro-Muslim, but a lot of them chose the Muslim side because it gave them a lot of advantages to be able to execute their plans. And it was more aligned with a lot of their internationalist world order goals. But ultimately, they were pitting them against each other. That was, they agreed on that for sure.
Yeah. I think the point is that every religion or any position of power, whether it's in a Christianity or in that people will gravitate towards trying to influence, control, and co-opt in anything we talk about. So the point is that the people in the Muslim community are trying to manipulate. Same with the Jewish, same with the Christian. I think that's everywhere. You know, and so we just always have to factor that in. You know, so we have examples of U.S. embassy giving Palestinian instructions to go to a certain area, which then gets coordinated and bombed by Israel. This has been acknowledged by even corporate media in the Rafah crossing discussion. We even have this contradiction, which is interesting, where they're claiming that the Hamas just bombed the Red Crescent, but then it turns out that even CNN acknowledges that the Red Cross was working with this convoy and told them to go there, and then Israel bombed them. And that's according to CNN and the Red Cross. So it's like you got this in real time, blatant lying about what's happening, as we can prove they're targeting people that are civilians. I just think that's an important thing to acknowledge. Now, I'm not going to play this because it's like 5 minutes and I want to get some other topics, but I'll include this. And I just think it's important that my point in the beginning was that we can show you that there's a lot of people that are involved on the ground that are very aware of, regardless of how this started, how what's happening is just unprecedentedly grotesque. But I want to point out that we also have people that are just average people that are posting online that are like, they're still kind of not in the know, it seems, but they're just simply going, I can't believe we're okay killing 400 civilians to go after a commander. Like that is wrong. We all know that's wrong. And I think people are just starting to see that, you know. Dan Cohen points out that Netanyahu is explicitly rejecting calls for any kind of a ceasefire, even though we have, like, this is what Zachary Foster points, like literally every group that I mean, this actually is a longer thread showing them all of them saying, just stop bombing, just stop bombing. It's illegal what's happening. But what he points out is that he won't stop. The ceasefire won't happen until the hostages are freed. And I think this is an important contradiction to highlight, which is that's already twice been offered. Twice, according to the UN, according to corporate media even, that they offered. I have the Washington Post article that outlines it. Hamas offered to release these hostages if you gave food to the people on the ground. The UN can do it, so we don't get any of it. They refused. That's happened twice. And so yet now he keeps standing up and saying, we won't have a ceasefire until you give us what we've refused twice. That's and there's it's very clear. It's right on the surface. Every platform's covering what they're saying, and you can prove that they've tried to do this more than once. And I just think that's important to understand that, you know, these people don't really want those hostages freed from a Zionist position. That's my opinion. But I don't know how else we factor that in. People like this that are going F around and find out Gaza before and after. It's like, okay, isn't that where the hostages are that you're telling us we need before we stop firing? Like, these people don't care about them. I don't know how else we wrap our minds around that. I mean, you guys have thoughts on that? It seems.
Who is this guy, Dr. Eli David?
Yeah, he's somebody who was during COVID my opinion now was sidling up to the people speaking truth about COVID, because in my opinion, some of these people are willfully ignoring provable things and blatantly lying about the history because they have a side in all this, which is just sad. I mean, my side is on civilian life, but I think it's one side at this point. Maybe that means I have a bias.
I don't know. No, I'm just looking him up. I'm just like that's so gross. Like, people, like, again, like
here he is conflating, you know, he goes, this is not 1938 Berlin, you know, referencing obviously, and this is 2023 Berlin. You mean all the people waving Palestinian flags? I don't see a Hamas flag anywhere, right? So he's literally conflating the march of pro-Palestine rallies to Nazis or the Holocaust or these conversations. And it's just, I don't think that's
seen a
honest.
lot of like the Babylon Bee's been doing a lot of that lately.
Yeah.
Like clips of like, doing that exact same comparison where it's like, if you're pro peace almost, then you're a Nazi. It's
That's
like,
Ben Shapiro's called people terrorists for advocating for peace. He's called Jewish people in Congress literally just calling for a ceasefire. He not only called them disgusting, he called them trash and said, those aren't my people. Like so now you're denigrating Jews? Because I'm like, they've lost the plot on this whole thing. I mean, it's wild.
Yeah.
Scott says there wasn't an Israeli Zionist entity in 1938. There is one today, hence the protest. But you knew that. You're just playing the Holocaust card poorly, polluting the memory of those who lost their lives in the Shoah by using it as a shield to hide the crimes of Israel. Or we have Kim Iverson saying, you're on the wrong side of history, bud. People are not rising up against the Jews. They're rising up for another group of oppressed Semites. Now, I'm not going to say there aren't people. There's always people that are attacking Jewish people or black people. There's gross people out there that would do that for any reason. And they'll take an example like this to go for. I often point out, and we shouldn't forget the groups like, remember Handsome Truth? Do you remember that? Is this ridiculous guy who, by the way, just turned up next to Boneface in Maine, standing there.
Really?
The guy who was like, I'm not a Nazi. And now here he is pro-Nazi. But he was one of these manipulators online. He's probably around still, who was out there in your going, name the Jew, and trying to get these channels to veer towards naming only this one group. And I promise you that person was being paid and influenced by it. That'd be my opinion.
Probably by the ADL.
No, I mean, look, we can prove that there's manipulation going on, so we shouldn't shy away from it. Let me rapidly go through this. Okay. So one thing I'll include, because Scott made sure to point out, it's not something we should shy away from. These are provable facts. Yeah. Okay. Gray Zone did a great job on this. As much as I'm highly critical, I think they did a great job on this. And same with the Cradle and a couple other groups. Monda Weiss had a great article about it. A growing number of reports indicate Israeli forces responsible for some of the Israeli casualties. And what the point is you can read this. And this was in Monda Weiss did a great job, and so did Electronic Intifada. You can literally listen to, I don't think they have the embeds in here, on Israeli mainstream radio and mainstream media. I think 4 different people we can prove on the record spoke up and said, and I think I just have it highlighted right here. For instance, but they were shelling the houses, including houses with all their occupants inside, in order to eliminate the terrorists along with the hostages. That was told directly to Haaretz. There's 4 people like that. A guy from the concert was saying, we're trying to run back, and they shot hostages along with other people. This is all, and they could be lying, apparently. That's pretty possible. But we have many examples. The helicopter pilots saying that they were told to fire, and they knew some of these cars could have been leaving with hostages in them. And that, I think some of these Hellfire bombs, we took out a car, we see burned people, which Hamas wasn't capable of, which we can now prove were killed by a missile. So clearly the IDF did kill some of their own people. This is the Hannibal Directive. The idea that they, on the record, you can look this up, have made, I think it was since, I forget his name now, a general was taken, people were shot because of it, and it made them look bad, or they had to give a bunch of people back and so on. So they now have a directive that says they're going to kill people, including the hostages, so they don't get used against them. That's coming directly from the Israeli government. Scott Ritter spoken on this. My point only being that there's provable evidence that Israel killed their own citizens on the 7th. To what degree? It's debatable, but that's not something we can dismiss anymore. It's been their own people have made this clear, which calls into question in my mind some of these videos, have where you just simply show people dead. Or this guy's been sharing a lot of graphic footage from the Peace Festival. What could be the Hamas, which I wouldn't dispute, would be shooting civilians, but we also have evidence now that they did themselves. So all I'm saying is we have to question this stuff. And I want to finish just with the point in general. I wanted to play this video to show you what I think a lot of these Zionists really, the mentality behind this, and showing that we have a lot of Orthodox Jews that live in Israel and in London and New York that are often attacked by other Jewish people, like we saw with Ben, or Zionist kind of minded people. Here's what this woman said to Orthodox Jews simply holding a Palestine flag and protesting to stop the war.
Hitler made a mistake. We should have been in the gas chamber. Too bad. But we're here, and you're gonna go to hell.
Wow. I'm never going to suggest that is everybody's opinion. This is just this one extremist woman's opinion. But she is literally speaking to Orthodox Jews and saying that, first of all, Hitler made one mistake, which is like, okay, clearly he made more than one mistake. So that's an interesting statement. But her point is to set up the sentence that you should have been in the gas chamber. Too bad, but we're still here and you're going to go to hell. That's what she just said twice to 2 different Orthodox Jews. And this is the Torah Judaism group that often protests, pro-Palestinian stuff, but apparently that's not acceptable. So I just think it adds a different dynamic to the presentation we're getting about what's really going on in all this. I just think that's important. And then we've got evidence of this kind of stuff happening where you've got Palestinians who've been released by the IDF who have been tagged with ID numbers. I think that's a little bit too much on the nose. I just think that it's
IBM behind that one as well.
This is from a French press agency, by the way. It's
I will just to add to all of this, I guess to wrap this up. I went down the Star of David rabbit hole. This one has been, I know, this was really like a very bitter pill for me. I'm a big fan of Dr. John Coleman's work, and it was like one of the things that he mentions quite often. I'm going to cry. I don't know why it makes me emotional, but it was one of those, like, I've had a lot of these where like my cognitive dissonance goes up, and I'm like, he's great, but I really disagree with him on this. And I really actually just refused to look at it for a long time. And I did over this past week, and there is absolutely no mention of the Star of David in the Bible at all. And there is like a Star of Rephaim, which looks like is what it's referencing, and that is in the Torah as it's a symbol to Moloch.
Well, there is a mention of Israel in the Bible, right? And that's where that comes from.
Absolutely.
So no Star of David?
But there's no Star of David.
Interesting. What's the implication to that?
So the implication, and this is where the conjecture, theory is that they took the Star of Rephaim, which does have the pentagram. That's why the argument is that the 6 points it creates, I guess like the pentagram. I would have to go through and
no worries. I just
outline all of the comparisons they made. I mean, the stars are not the same, but I can't prove that part, and I don't know, but it would make sense that if somebody were, a Satanist, that they would invert and create something that was, similar, but a deception. But the part that I do know is there is no Star of David.
I always picture the as above, so below type of deal, right?
Exactly.
Symbology,
yeah. But that one was really hard for me because, that means that, this is the symbol that, most Jews use. And if you do look, a lot of the, Orthodox Jews don't. They have like the letters as they don't wear Star of David. I'm sure some do, but a lot of them don't. They wear the letters instead. So
that's interesting. So obviously the point there then this is not about Zion. What's the idea? Is that that's a Zionist manipulation, or is this undercutting the actual concept of Judaism?
I think it's a Zionist manipulation.
Interesting.
I do. And I think to create this emblem that is not that they've attached so much identity to that it's not referenced in the Bible. And most I don't know, maybe I'm just naive. I wasn't raised with a lot of biblical training, so I don't know that, but I don't think I'm alone in that. I think a lot of Jews think that the Star of David has biblical meaning.
Yeah, interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's very fascinating.
Yeah. Well, it speaks to the larger point about how as
we've been lied to about everything.
Well, that's the group I was just. We didn't get it. They didn't show another clip from them, but the Torah Judaism is their group. They're in London, New York, and Israel, and that's the point. They get beat up by the IDF all the time for protesting. Their main point is that Zionism is a manipulation of Jews. Right,
yeah,
it's co-opted Judaism, and they don't know that, and so that just adds more.
Right from the Khazari Mafia, they chose Judaism as a cover. That part of history is, I think, it's considered mainline history.
Not to Israel for sure, and the government, right?
Well, the Khazari Mafia part, yeah. I don't know. I don't know what the Israeli government says about that. That's
fascinating, though. It really. There's so many of these data points that. See, this is my point from the beginning.
And there are those 2 phrases in the Bible that do talk about, the Jews that are not Jews, but they are the synagogue of Satan.
Yeah,
that is in the Bible.
But this is kind of my point from the beginning, that I really do feel like this has opened up this conversation. The things that we can prove are true, but yet have still been super sensitive. People don't want to get into, and people are just willing to consider different points and ask questions. I think that's always healthy, no matter how much it seems sensitive to some people.
I definitely don't claim to have the answers on any of this, but I will just say that I've started to look at things that before I just would not look at. So
yeah.
So I have compassion for people. I just want to say I have compassion for people. This is a difficult subject. I think,
it is.
It is not easy because people have been fed so many lies. And it is obviously, it's a very heightened, because there have been genocides,
Yep.
So people, obviously are very emotional about it, and understandably so.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, again, it's impossible because people that's the main point, is that we're being manipulated by power structures to fight each other, and that's always how this works. And speaking of that, actually, let's get into Scott's part of this conversation. China joins West to talk AI rules amid tech rivalry.
Yeah, I just love this because, like, we started off the episode saying, like, oh, we're going to do about 20 minutes on each of our segments. And here we're all, almost 2 hours in, and we're on segment 2, the second 20-minute segment here. So we'll see how this goes. But yeah, so I don't know. I just thought this was fascinating because I listened to the interview with Joe Rogan and Elon Musk this last week, right? And at the end of that interview, I guess they recorded that interview on Halloween night, like that night, you know what I mean? And Elon's like, yeah, I actually got to go. I'm catching a plane to go to the UK to go to this AI safety conference. And I was like, oh, AI safety conference, very interesting. And then I saw this thing pop up on Twitter where he was being interviewed by Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the UK. And I was like,
why is he interviewing people in the first place?
He was the one that hosted this summit, which is really interesting. Yeah, the whole thing is really interesting. And it really coincides with what Courtney's going to talk about, which is so fascinating because, yes, I just see this verge of AI. Like, it's just so fascinating to watch, you know what I mean? Like, in so many different aspects. Like, to me, it seems like it could be such a powerful tool for humanity to really level up. Like, it could be in the hands of the right people, right? Like, let's say we each had the individual power to generate our own AI that was our own. I mean, I don't know. Maybe everybody hates me now for saying this, but to me, it seems like there's something there. But sadly, it just falls into the hands of the wrong people. And I think that this whole safety conference is so alarming because what we know about these governments and regulatory agencies and everything, they always use safety as an excuse to take away people's freedoms 100% of the time. And so this is no exception.
And convenience,
safety and convenience. And so that's why that's the only lens that I see this whole thing through. When you have people like Rishi Sunak, who, I listened to the interview that he did with Elon, and I'd never really heard hadn't heard him talk in long form before. And I was like, okay, he seems like a smart guy. I looked into him a little bit. He's like a former Goldman Sachs guy and all this stuff, you know what I mean? And just but he seemed to know what he was talking about in terms of engine, like computer science, engineering, stuff like that. And I was like, he's not just, he's not some slouch apparently. Apparently knows what he's talking about a little bit. So it was really fascinating. But the confluence of this seminar or whatever was really interesting. The fact that they were making a big point of the fact that they'd invited China to come over, where normally, China's kind of our rival. And this has been presented as an arms race, right? It's we're in this AI arms race with China, but now we're all going to sit down at the table together, which is an interesting dynamic.
I think that's always what is actually going on, especially in the tech world.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly. And then of course, we all know that Elon's now positioning himself to be the AI
savior,
king, the AI king or savior, which is really fascinating too.
Yeah.
But it was just such an interesting contrast to see him go from I thought it was a pretty robust conversation with Rogan. I'm not the biggest Rogan fan in the world or whatever. I've got plenty of issues with him, or even the biggest Elon fan. But I thought their conversation was, robust, had some really good points. It's fascinating. Because these people are on the forefront of just so many rapidly developing things, and then to hear him have that conversation then with Sunak, it was just very contrasting because then it felt like he was more playing he was just playing along with the globalists, basically, these global entities that are kind of trying to take our freedoms away. And it was really kind of weird and unsettling. But the other really funny part that I thought about it was, the U.S. sent a representative to represent the U.S. in this very high level conversation about the future of technology. You know who that representative was?
Who?
It was Kamala Harris.
That's right. That's right.
So the whole thing.
I think technological expert Kamala Harris definitely.
Yes, exactly.
What did she just do? She said no, that was the wrong thing. But she said something really dumb about AI, didn't she? Just recently. Well, I forget what it was. It was a clip where she just said something what jumped into my mind was what do you have to say wrong? Don't. Yeah. What a stupid thing to say. But she said something just like that with AI. We're all she doesn't know what she's talking about.
You're right. She did.
Well, I sent that her presentation at the conference. It was AI has the possibility of being very good.
That's what it was. Is that the one you sent me? Let's play it.
But AI also has the possibility of being very bad. I'm like,
thank you, Sesame Street AI.
Come on, jeez. Can we replace you with AI, please? Tomorrow, please.
Should I play it?
Play it.
I think
AI has the potential to do profound good.
Yes.
It also
looks
has
around
the potential to cause profound harm. From AI-enabled cyber attacks at a scale beyond anything we've seen before, to AI-formulated bioweapons that could endanger the lives of millions of people. These threats are often referred to as the existential threats of AI, because, of course, they could endanger the very existence of humanity. These threats, without question, are profound, and they demand global action. I firmly believe that we must be guided by a
what I think is hilarious is that she's so enamored with her own perceived intelligence.
Yeah,
she thinks,
I
just, don't you love
listening?
Right. That's the best part where she's like, it can be bad, right? Everyone, we're on the same page, right? or good.
And it's very profound.
It's just so funny. And, she treats people like they're in kindergarten.
It's profound how profound it is.
You know who usually does that? People who aren't that smart. I'm serious. Like you're projecting that you're so superior that we have to talk down to everybody. She's so bad.
Yeah, but it's just, I don't trust governments or any of these things to institute the type of protections that would be needed to save. I don't know. I mean, I somewhat to a certain degree believe in some of these existential type of threats. You know what I mean? In a very extreme manner. You know what I mean? If you really extrapolate the possibility of what these systems could create, eventually, if it's really crazy, or not necessarily like a lot of the arguments presented in the sense that it's like a sentient thing, but I don't think consciousness can be created artificially. Like that's just my personal belief. And so I don't think that will ever be achieved, but it can have the perception that it is like super intelligent, but it'll never have like that spark of creation
but
or spark of consciousness.
Could be really dangerous.
But exactly. But also at this
pretend that it's we have to listen to the AI as they're inputting what they want.
But at the same time, it's like the future of it's talking about like taking jobs is one of the other concerns they're talking about, right? But to me, it's like what the future of human jobs are going to be like the ones that are providing the input. AI is still a computer system where it requires an input in order to generate an output, right? So like the future. People will go to college to learn, how to interact with an AI and provide the proper inputs in order to achieve the desired output. You know what I'm saying? And so it's going to be
different job field.
It's going to be different, but
that might be a good time to play that video of the Pentagon's view of 2045.
Yeah, but the last thing I was just going to say on that is that's like, so that's where the existential threat comes from, is where you have forces that are providing, malicious input. So that's not necessarily like the AI taking over and becoming sentient and running amok, but it's more so like entities who don't have humanity's best interests at heart, or even like entities like Google that don't have humanity's best interests at heart, like using this technology to run amok on everybody else.
That's my biggest problem, though, right? Is that I see it going two ways. Is you have first of all, just to aggressively disagree with you from the beginning, is that I just don't see a world in which this cannot end up like that.
Yeah.
Because this is the problem, like the other conversation, we're starting in a position where you've got people in control acting like the altruistic ones that are never going to do this the right way, or any power structure. If you allow this kind of power, it'll end up in the people's hands at some point that will abuse it. And I just don't see how it can go forward, or it ends up being the AI that takes over the world.
Or it could be like those videos that we played a few episodes ago where the AI becomes like Ex Machina or like a Terminator. And basically decides that they have to eradicate humans at all.
Which seems like a fair point to make.
They don't want to be property.
But you know what's really fascinating too about this is that I remember when I was a kid, like in the mid 90s, my dad was an engineer and worked at a computer company, and we had like a personal computer and had like DSL internet, probably before anybody I knew. I was on the internet as like an 8-9-year-old kid, going into like IRC chat rooms, learning about wares, downloading, writing. I was like a little hacker type guy, right? And I've been in kind of peripherally in the hacker world for a while, not in a black hat malicious sort of way, but it fascinates me. And that's always kind of been the culture where it's you have the white hats, the black hats, and it's almost like an arms race together. So it's however far they push there's always going to be a subculture of hacker type people, whether they're being malicious or not, counteracting everything. And it's just always this kind of just competitive thing that happens. And so it's very interesting when you look at it from that context. It's these tools are available. So, the more the more it gets created out there into the world, people in the hacker world are going to take up that technology and they could possibly counter it. You know what I mean? It's a really cool thing.
It comes down to this. It's I guess the core question that comes to my mind when you make that point is it a foregone conclusion? Because it's the same kind of argument you can make about with arms race, the good analogy for it, right? So before there was ever a gunpowder or munitions of any kind, the question at that point, if it was even possible to stop that from ever happening, the question would have been, do we not allow it, or do we allow it and then just make sure good people also have guns? It's the same kind of game, right? So if that's right, my opinion would be if it's actually possible, which I think it's clearly not, that we just stop this from happening.
No,
that seems like the way to go. But you're right, though. If it's going to happen, it's inevitable. The argument would be that we need to have people that understand it, that can use it to fight back.
Exactly.
And that seems like that makes me stress out just even thinking about it.
Let's do it, man.
Well, I would
TLAV
argue.
AI.
Yeah.
There you go.
No thanks.
I think one of the things that we really, when we get to my section, I think one of the things we need to do as Americans is there needs to be all sorts of legislature. I mean, I think the UN should not have started. We should not have entered it. We should dismantle it. But if that doesn't happen, what we really need to do in America is not enter into that AI treaty. That is like,
that's interesting.
Oh, what if
that is really like a hill I think we need to die on.
What if they're intentionally, like the government and everything, like they're intentionally just making themselves look like such foolish idiots so that they can then make the argument, oh, let's just replace all of it with AI, right?
That was a fair point.
Well, they've already said they're going to replace elections with AI.
Right.
Yeah.
The treaty is an interesting conversation, though, right? Because, well, first, there's plenty of treaties like the nuclear treaty that Israel just doesn't sign, nobody cares. Like, where they can just not be a part of it, but they'll still kind of guide where it goes. But also just that, hypothetically, let's just say they don't sign it. How would that ever play out? Because the point is, it's still going to go. They're still going to work and build. And so it's like, if they don't sign it, is that more dangerous or less dangerous?
See, I obviously don't have a crystal ball, but hypothetically, I think because what we do still have are alliance power block structures. So I think ideally we don't enter. We talk to our quote unquote allies about not entering and creating, more of a decentralized system, because really they're using AI as an excuse to bring this, they call it the age of the new age of global enlightenment, but it's really that they're bringing the one world government through AI. That's what they're trying to push. So,
and the point you made before, I think is the main part of it, but then using it as if it's essentially an all-knowing being when it's really just them driving it. So that's like this perfect little Wizard of Oz scenario they're creating right in front of us right now. Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah,
it's really terrifying.
I just think that the whole the treaty part of it is, so I guess the positive look on that would be that if they didn't sign it and they advocate that nobody does, there still will be people that will use it bad ways, but hopefully it'll be decentralized to the point to where it's not some all-encompassing.
Yes.
Okay. I see.
Then it's not the governing body over us.
Yeah. Right. I get it.
We don't subscribe. We're not necessarily beholden to their laws.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Policies and, I don't know. Do you have more stuff?
No, I think that's pretty much
I mean, if you want to go through some of it, there is. So
they
have a Bill of Rights.
This is hers.
Oh, well, these were things I thought you sent in general, but so we have on that same poll, we've already talked about these as well. This is the 2022 AI Bill of Rights. We covered this on the daily wrap up, but then there's also the new discussion came out on the 30th, the fact sheet, which is terrifying. President Biden issues executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy artificial intelligence. And that's, I think, when she came out and did this, or was this, 3 days ago. And so really it's about kind of laying out the groundwork, and read some of this stuff. It's terrifying. I mean, it talks about it's just everything. AI generated. Oh, there's one part that I actually did cover on the show on this, which was about the deep fake part of it. Protecting Americans from AI-enabled fraud and deception by establishing standards. And it gets into this, and I don't even know if that's the right one, but it gets into this whole point about where, clearly they're going to be the ones controlling like this deep fake apparatus. And it's like, and they're even outlining it now. Like, we need to know how to use them to be able to.
We didn't think it was already happening, but now we're telling you, oh, don't worry, we're going to protect you from it.
Which is exactly my point. It's like, so they come out and say, we need to get ahead of this deep fake thing. It's like 5-10 years too late, right? We're already
40 years too late.
Yeah, it's like clearly this is happening. So my point is, why hasn't we already seen this deep fake onslaught? It's because these are the kind of people that actually do that.
Exactly.
And they're getting ready. Like, it's coming because we're about to start it.
Exactly.
Terrifying. And then you had just thrown in the AI Summit Wikipedia page.
Yeah.
So I guess we can transition that into your focus on the AIWS,
which
discussion.
Is the World Society. Yeah. Wow. So they're calling it for a better world with AI. What it is the age of global enlightenment. So there's a book, and Michael Dukakis, along with I'm going to butcher the beginning of the names, but Tuan is the last name. I have written, and this was written in, I think, 2019, came out in 2020, but very few people are really talking about it. And what it is they call it the centennial of the 100. So they're calling it UN 100. And so they're trying to imagine what the world is going to be in 2045. And they imagine a world that is essentially what it looks like, run by AI. So some of the things that they're doing, they had a summit on rebuilding Ukraine. So I think this is very relevant because of obviously all the war tensions. And they even talk about that. They talk about, Ukraine being devastated by war and that we need to rebuild it. Of course, didn't Biden just ask for like a one and done, something crazy, $100 billion? I think got changed, like added 105. Then he's like, well, no, we'll add it to Israel also. And
by the way, just since you mentioned that, I was just going to include this before that Biden asked for, wherever the hell it was, arms deals with Israel now to be completely done in secrecy. What in the F, man? Like that's so crazy. And even people in the State Department, this guy who resigned in protest because he's like, this is genocide. So I've never seen anything like this. Whether it's Israel or anybody else, how is that not just dishonesty? Sorry, I didn't mean to derail. Go ahead. I think that's crazy.
Yeah, absolutely. I am not for the secrecy of any of it. I know they argue that there has to be secrecy to protect us, but I think that's just a cover for the. I don't either. I think that the public can handle it, and if they can't, then they need to go live, off the grid somewhere, which maybe that's what we all need to do. I don't know. But yeah, so they've written this Age of Global Enlightenment, which just, what does that sound like? It sounds like the Age of the New Order, or the, Age of the New Underground World Order, or the New World Order, or the Great Reset. Really, it's all the same, but this is couched in like a kind of a new age meets AI type of language.
Scary.
And it's really scary. And yes, they do have a Bill of Rights. They're calling for AI government. This is what I'm saying is, this is the AI rights. So the AI Bill of Rights outlines and delineates all the things that we have to subscribe to. And of course, this is the UN who is putting it forward. This is why I'm saying, I think as Americans, we should not enter, because when they talk about the AI government, that's essentially going to be a controlling body. And, back to Ukraine, that what they want to do is make Ukraine the hub. So it's going to be this major, like centralized hub. And then it's going to be connected to all of these other smart cities. And it'll be essentially that the Hiveborg mind will be located in Ukraine. So when they're talking about an AI government, I think it's really these people are now who have been vying for world governance and a world governing body are now pushing for it to be an AI world government.
Interesting. What if it turns out to be the very first network meshing is Lahaina, East Palestine, Palestine, Syria, like all these destroyed in weird circumstances that all, it's interesting, right? All these destroyed to rebuild. I'm kind of making a joke, but
I think there's a lot of validity to that, because they keep saying how a lot of these cities that they've destroyed were designated,
which is weird, by the way,
15-minute cities. And Gaza is one of them.
Yeah.
So,
or just all of Israel. Like, what if Israel becomes the central part of this to be like, we need to rebuild it, let us control the outcome of it, which wouldn't surprise me at all, right?
It wouldn't surprise me. They're definitely looking to create all of these smart cities that are connected to one centralized smart city, which is out of Ukraine. There's even
the weird Zionist overlap with Ukraine that Vanessa Beeley brought up, that there's just theories that she does see some evidence for, but that she's not saying is necessarily happening, but that they might try to just be like, in the worst of circumstances, let's move Israel to Ukraine.
And I think there is an interesting case to be made. So, and this, I think, unfortunately does tie to the Khazarians, because one of the things that I really, really hate is a lot of people conflate Khazarians with Ashkenazis. So if you're going to even subscribe to this line of thinking, you have to understand that the argument is genetic, and that makes it a false argument, because the Khazarians genetically, while they did set up shop in what would now be called Ukraine, that seems to be one of the bases that they made for themselves. However, their genetic lineage would be traced to Turkey. Ashkenazis are not Turkish. They're Eastern European. So there is definitely a genetic distinction there. And I think a lot of people are trying to conflate the two. And that is just a bone of contention for me personally. But if it's
important difference,
it is a very important difference. And it's an important distinction. So but if you do trace this Khazarian lineage, which of course we know there's a lot of evidence to indicate that the Rothschilds were the Bauers who were connected to this Khazarian mafia, then yes, they did set up a kind of a headquarters in Ukraine for a while. I don't know if the headquarters is quite the right word, but they set up a base there, and it would make sense for them to now try and relocate and redirect there. But either way, whether you look at it that way or not, it does look like they're trying to make Ukraine very much like a headquarters for this AI world society.
Don't forget, they were the first state at least they claimed that met all the World Economic Forum metrics way in the middle of an invasion, which made no sense.
Hey, Jacob in the chat says you can't spell Ukraine without AI.
Hey,
that is true.
Here's an interesting point, by the way, that just since this comes up, you mentioned the Ashkenazi and the difference there, which is important. Not that this necessarily has to connect, but I think it's important to reiterate because this got buried by, interestingly enough, calling RFK anti-Semitic before he went on his massive pro-Israel tour, which now he's tellingly very quiet about because not a good subject. But this was the point was that he was claiming, which was backed up by this peer-reviewed study. It's not claiming, it was a fact, which is that Ashkenazi Jews specifically were less susceptible to whatever we're calling COVID-19 per this study anyway. For those that argue it's not real, fair point. But it's just simply saying the Amish and Ashkenazi Jews did not have the specific variant ACE2 gene, which made them like the least out of everyone they tested susceptible, which is interesting. Just to point out the bioweapon overlap is we know that both China and the US are working on. Israel did work on.
Well, the Amish have a The Amish have a similar genetic profile actually to Ashkenazi. But really what that was the K2R6 line is what they're talking about. And it's not just Ashkenazi. It really is about the KR26 line.
Right. So, but the point in the study was that Ashkenazi and Amish were the two that they stood out in their study. My point was just simply that's an interesting genetic overlap with the conversation, but really just that we know that Israel also worked on ethnic weapons with apartheid South Africa, but that all of them have worked on these things. So it's just an interesting point, that may play a factor as it goes forward.
Dr. Lee and I have actually covered this in like several episodes, and it really is about the KR2. I always reverse the numbers. So I don't know if it's KR26 or K26R, but it's something like that. I'll have to go back and verify. But it's that specific line genetically that made them less susceptible to the ACE2 binding. But yeah, I do remember that. So when you look through this book, it's like a 200-something page, almost 300-page book that Michael Dukakis just celebrated his 90th birthday. They sent out a whole thing about, all these plans that they're doing for this. It's in conjunction with the Boston Global Forum. And the language is very much like a lot of it's all about like
what is it?
AI citizen. So they're creating.
Is that the book you were referencing?
Yeah.
Okay. So making sure.
This book, the AI citizen, they talk about, this is 17 sustainability goals. They talk about DEI. They talk about ESG. And so this is why I say I think it's one of the things that I want Americans to be aware of. And if we are going to opt out of anything, I think it is one of the things we really should not engage and enter.
Yeah, I agree.
Because they want to use that as an excuse for us to then be part of this global governance.
Well, and the obvious point, it probably doesn't need to be said for our audiences, is that then will necessitate by like almost in reverse the need for digital ID and social credit and all these different things that we're acting like aren't happening, but they're going to be like, well, now we need them, otherwise the system won't work.
Exactly. And they're talking about that. They talk about essentially they don't use the word social credit, but they talk about that in this book.
You have to. I mean, how else do you grade people using the AI system? The system has to be able to do that.
Yeah, they use different language, but that's essentially what they're saying.
Which they already are, which we know, right? It's not just the credit cards; it's happening for everything.
For sure. I don't know if you want to play the Pentagon Imagining 2045 because they're essentially talking about, and we know this is what the Internet of Things connected to the Internet of Bodies was all about. Is they're trying to do away with things like keyboards that we're just going to have, and there's so many WEF videos showing this where these quote unquote experts talk about how we're just going to be able to have neural interface.
We played them on the show, I think, right?
Yeah.
We played the one about the scarf. We played the one where the Wi-Fi one. We just played that. Yeah. How creepy that was. That he's like, they can literally read your thoughts. Or God, this is the point we've always brought up. This stuff, if we're being shown now, it's already happening.
It's already
and that scares me to think about what's already being done to us. But I think
what's interesting about the Pentagon is because this ties this all full circle because the Pentagon is like DARPA is tied to the Pentagon. That's really where a lot of this technological advancement would be coming out of. And they're all tied to this larger military industrial apparatus. And I talk about the triple MIC So it's the military industrial complex, the medical industrial complex, and then the media industrial complex. Yeah. And what do we have? We have the big pharma funding the military industrial complex and all the research that then gets weaponized against us. And then we have the media industrial complex who's selling us all these narratives to justify, whatever their plans are. And I just think, it's not, to me, it really is this bigger apparatus that's fomenting all of this because they want to push this agenda.
I agree. And
that's really where they're trying to go. And of course, if we have a war, they have an excuse to rebuild, right? Like rebuilding Ukraine was one of their, symposiums. They have an excuse to give us a solution that's going to be so great because now AI can save the day. We don't have to worry about the fact that we're economically financially devastated because now we have a whole new system that's going to save us. We have, the fact that we're emotionally and physically drained and all our resources been drained. Well, now we have a virtual world that we can just tap right into. I hope this isn't what happens, but I can very clearly see this is the picture they're trying to paint.
I agree. And I really hope we can also, just as we always do, question everything. I agree with you. I think that makes the most sense. But stand back and wonder whether because we're doing this, which I do think we have more of an effect as just the independent media than we realize on the outcome, that whether or not that might be the plan that was, and that now the things have shifted in the direction they take another plan, and be ready for that. It's not always just because I think this happens a lot in this field where we kind of get stuck as like, it happens both ways where all of a sudden we act like oil is no longer the thing that wars are about. Well, it is still, but it's other things too. You just got to keep an open mind about where this may go, because as we know, there are multifaceted plans laid out.
I think a great example of that is Ukraine, right? They really, and I actually think it is the independent media that derailed a lot of those plans.
I agree.
You had a lot of people supporting the current thing and holding up their sign who they support, but you had a lot of people saying, wait,
I think the majority. I think the majority from the very beginning, and I think that we've been at a time. That's my opinion, but I've been saying it for a long time. But I think we're at a point now where that's already like with what's going on in Israel, Palestine, with Ukraine, or any of them, Lahaina, where people are just kind of like getting bombarded with this is what we're all thinking, and we're like, that's not true. Do you think that? Like everyone's like, that's not real, and we're starting to see the outlines of the manipulation. It makes me happy to see. I was going to ask you in general, did you want to make some comments on this video, or should we just end with it?
Maybe we'll just end with it. Okay. Yeah, I don't really have. It's kind of self-explanatory.
That's going to play us out.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Well, because it's we're good at about 2 hours. I think it's been a good conversation. Beautiful. And and I want to reiterate too something I think is super important is that we obviously have different opinions on all sorts of different things, and I think it's so important that we're first able to have these conversations, as much as they can get emotional in any other circumstances, because we care about these things, but that we can walk away amicably and, and then hopefully, as we always point out, coming to some new distilled reality understanding and, considering other perspectives. It's just, this is and this is why I think you guys believe in what we're doing here, because so few people actually care about that, let alone do it, so
true.
Honored to be here with both of you.
You too. Yeah, I mean,
if you want to shout something out?
Well, I just figured just like end of show plugs type of stuff.
Yeah, right? Go for it.
Yeah. So, I was gonna say, apparently ChatGPT says there's no credible evidence to suggest
ChatGPT, this guy.
I know, but hey, listen. I'm on the hunt, right? There's no credible evidence to suggest that the Amish or any specific group, for that matter, created the COVID virus, which leads me to believe that they probably had something to do with it. So I'm going to be looking into this.
The reverse.
Over the next week, because if they say it's not true, then it probably is true. So I'm going to be looking into that. I'll report back on that. But in the meantime, you can find me at libertylinks.io/rebunked, all my work, all my stuff.
And then the week after that, we'll be going into a cyborg transition as he goes into the AI world.
Exactly.
Anything else to shout out before we go?
Sure. CourtenayTurner.com. It's like Courtenay. So COURTENAY TURNER.com. And we have just updated the Rebels for Cause page because we are seeking sponsors and any donation. We have received some already, so we really, really appreciate that. We do want to make that happen pretty soon. So yeah.
Cool.
Outstanding. We'll include that for you guys. Make sure you check out and follow. I think we've got plenty more coming on that, right? More cause.
Yeah.
Events.
Definitely.
Outstanding.
We just did a thing with Stu Peters. I talked about why we're doing it. I kind of went through a very, very brief overview of the history of propaganda as it pertains to the arts.
He knows well. He's very educated on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, but I think this was a great conversation, guys. And I really do. I just value this so much. And so thank you both for being here. And thank you all for tuning in. And we have plenty more coming, more plans, lots more coming forward. Still at the moment, if you want to support us, make sure you do so on our individual platforms until we get something set up just for Pirate Stream.
Yeah.
And thanks for tuning in.
Yeah.
See you next time, guys. Oh, wait. Oh, I almost forgot the video. They know I do that. I do that every time. Here it is.